All right.
On April 16, 2025, the United Kingdom Supreme Court made an amendment to the Equality Act of 2010. This amendment legally codified the definition of woman under biological sex. Dr. Michael Foran, a lecturer at Glasgow University, explained that while trans women are still protected under the law, that this judgment has made it clear that it is lawful to exclude biological males from female-only services, where those female-only services are lawful under the Equality Act. Most public services, like toilets, will be. Of course, what this
So again, we could probably say for the most part, so this Supreme Court ruling, well, we would certainly, at least in my opinion, this would again, defining woman as biologically is a biological dependent descriptor. So it's a descriptor slash category. Can't fucking type today. So we can see numerous issues arising from this automatically. That let's actually just make this Times New Roman. Something like that. All right. Let's make this bullet points. Why not? So we have issues with this in the sense that, again, woman and female are not the same word. Can't spell today. Not synonymous. They are not the same word. I have many issues with, again, woman being synonymous with female, female synonymous with woman. This ruling says that a woman is a biological, again, basically trying to define that woman naturally has the characteristic of female inherent in its descriptor. Again, socially and colloquially, this may be true 95% of the time, 98% of the time, but it does create a rather problematic issue for, again, any transgender individuals in the sense that, again, transgenderism specifically, transgenderism exists within this difference of meaning and use. Specifically, it is looking at the social aspect. They're looking at the social and cultural usage of woman in the sense that we are identifying in this particular case, the grammatical and the pronoun usage, the ideological kind of construct of woman. Again, problems. Nothing wrong with this so far.
means for trans men is left up in the air because transphobes rarely consider them in these conversations.
So, a small things I would
Because
have right here is transphobes. Is that I'm not sure I agree that ignorance equals intent or some kind of design here. Continued ignorance, perhaps, but I would disagree with the ignorant, this kind of immediate, oh, only transphobes would believe this. Again, the issue is that within common parlance, I hate typing on this keyboard actually. Within common parlance, woman is equal to female and vice versa. This is not without merit from an ideological standpoint, as much of history, again, 95 to 99% of all women you are ever going to meet are female. From a scientific standpoint, or from a factual standpoint, it would be incorrect to say a woman is a female and a female will be a woman, because woman, its usage, both the word and the concept in it, is the sociological and cultural construct that has been heavily informed by, but is not 100% determined to, the some degree of biological reality, but not exclusively. Again, this is one of those things where I agree, but I'm not sure. I don't. Again, somebody not caring about your particular ideological moral framework does not necessarily make them X or Y. They may be doing it to a certain degree. I'm just, and again, I hesitate to say this because for the most part, I tend to probably agree, is that more often than not, this is going to come from a generally transphobic or deliberately bigoted and or mean-spirited, whatever word phrase you would want to use, perspective. But I do want to give the benefit of the doubt, what I would like to give, as best as possible.
How are you going to stop a man, a normal man, going into a woman's toilets and saying, I'm a trans man? And so I think we have to look at
I don't follow that logic.
Why?
Because the point is that we're saying that people who are biologically men shouldn't be using women's toilets. That's the point of this ruling, among other things.
But a trans man is biologically a woman.
Someone who's transitioned from being a woman to a man is...
And so they would then have to use women's toilets.
Yeah, so that's the big issue for this is in defense, again, the trans man aspect is never considered. So again, if you're saying, oh, they're allowed, we're not saying you can't be on hormones or you can't do all these things, you can't be this way. We're just saying that you can't use, these things are biological exclusive. So it's like, okay, well then now we have a problem. A trans man, i.e. a female who is currently socially, culturally acknowledged to be a man, must use the women's toilet. So you're going to have individuals in there who may have been, again, 20, to use the most extreme visual kind of thing that, again, transphobes tend to kind of look at as like, well, we don't want these hairy-armed men who are just sex pests, who are just crazy cross-dressers in a wig. Just imagine the most absurd transphobic kind of depiction. 6 foot tall, 250 pound man who's just put on a dress and a wig and says they're trans, whatever horrible shit they would say. Imagine that as like, oh, well, that person is trying to get into the women's toilet. It's like, well, okay, but I mean, your solution actually didn't solve jack shit. In many ways, you're now forcing trans men who may have been, again, they were a biological woman who transitioned decades ago, been taking HRT and testosterone and all manner of stuff. So now that they look like this dude, this guy has to go into the women's toilets. So the question would be, would you be okay with somebody who looks exactly like you physically, for the most part, and who acts like you socially for the most part? They act like a man going into the woman's toilets. And you'd be like, no. Well, it's like, well, that's what's going to happen with this bill. Because you didn't think about it because you're stupid. So this would be indeed a good counter. Not necessarily that they're 100% transphobic. They're just, even if they aren't transphobic, it doesn't matter whether they're doing this from hate, ignorance, or whatever. It's stupid and it doesn't work. Yeah. Silence. You can't answer. You have no idea what the fuck to do with that.
I think this...
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
This challenge to the act was brought by the transphobic group For Women Scotland, or FWS, a group formed in 2018 that has, from my research, done absolutely nothing about women's rights and only exists to perpetuate transphobia.
So, I don't know about that. It could be. So, For Women's Rights, the organization, whatever it is for most part an anti-trans thing. I believe it probably is. Movement is just cannot spell today. I don't know what's wrong with my brain. Trans concept being enacted. So they're basically, and what they might respond with is, we're not anti-trans, we just don't want XYZ happening. Basically, they're perfectly fine with the transgender ideological position existing in a metaphysical sense. And so again, this would be a massive dodge on their part, and I would probably agree with this. I don't know if they have done nothing for women's rights in any degree. And again, this gets into an ideological space to where they may have done some things to help out the woman's rights, in the sense of they're helping out the women who are biologically female, but they're not helping out the women who are not biologically female. I don't know about that, but it's fine.
They are a feminist organization with no
I don't agree with the feminist air quotes here. Cannot type today. Yeah, just not. I hate typing on this keyboard. I regret buying it almost immediately. I just don't like typing on it. It's a fine keyboard. It doesn't work for me. So my issue with this is that it is entirely possible for them to be a feminist organization and anti-trans. I know everybody wants feminism. Well, no, feminism about the equality of women, and we've had one of these things. Again, this is a no true Scotsman kind of fallacy to a degree. Because it is saying, like, again, because I identify as feminist, but these people identify as feminists and there's a disagreement between us, it simply flattens and simplifies the ideological differences. And again, this typically comes about from a sort of how do I want to phrase that? This idea that I and we and my ideological position is good, and I identify all of these characteristics as being this. So I identify with being a feminist, ergo, I am a true feminist. And somebody who is different from you and somebody who does something bad that you identify as being good and stemming from this cannot be this. Again, it ends up being this kind of purity testing thing that it splits hairs unnecessarily, and I know it is mostly done just for political and social clout reasons, because you don't want to deal with the implications of, again, they're just bad. It's not, there isn't a problem with the ideological foundation. The ideology is perfect and fine. It's just people who are practicing it wrong. I wouldn't go so far as to say that. But that's not too major of a quibble. It can become a major quibble, though.
Feminist ideology or political interest outside of harassing trans women, despite this being, quite frankly, a horrible fucking time to rights, and from my research, done absolutely nothing about women's rights and only exist to perpetuate transphobia. They are a feminist organization with no feminist ideology or political interest outside of.
So no feminist ideology or political interest. Again, this is one of those things where, like, well, they aren't doing what I think they should be doing according to the XYZ reasons. Therefore, they cannot be it. I'm not 100% on board with this kind of perspective, because it leaves us in a bit of a quandary. But again, mostly
harassing trans women.
And again, the harassment of trans women, like, are they specifically like harassing like individual trans women, or is this kind of more your existence as a harassment, your existence and your ideology harms us? So again, this would be one of those things where I think this is somewhat careless to say. If they actually are making it a point of them to harass and follow transgender women on social media, whatever, to do this, and that's just kind of what they do all day. Okay, maybe we could kind of see that. Again, claims like this should always have some degree of proof behind them. If you're going to make a description that delegitimizes a ideological position, you should have some proof showing that. Now, she might show some later on. It's a long video. We've barely gotten into it, but again, show proof before making statements is what I always try to encourage people to do.
Despite this being, quite frankly, a horrible fucking time to be a woman in the world. It wishes transphobia. They are a feminist organization with no feminist ideology or political interest outside of harassing trans women. Despite this being, quite frankly, a horrible fucking time to be a woman in the world.
Again, not big on the hyperbole. Again, I can understand this and the jokey kind of nature of this, but quite frankly, look, the loss of rights from some for some aspects of womanhood and woman existence in America, at least. Again, the Roe v. Wade thing, and that's pretty bad, and that sucks. But it's not a particularly horrible time to be a woman. It just simply isn't. It's not a particularly great time to be a woman. Like this implies, okay, was there a time in which it was better to be a woman? You might suggest, okay, maybe 10, 15 years ago, before we had the loss of Roe v. Wade, I could kind of see that. But honestly, I have no doubt that if I was to watch videos or you or your conception of this, you would say that time was a horrible time to be a fucking woman. Every time is a horrible time to be anything at all times. I'm not fond of this catastrophizing of things, especially in an ironic sense. Like, you're saying this as a joke as an inside joke, because everyone knows, yeah, this is kind of true, and we're just kind of saying this joke, like gallows humor kind of thing. But I don't know. I don't agree to any extent with that statement. But again, I don't agree not because things are great. I disagree because I don't think they are ever particularly great for anybody right now, period. This is sadly something that sounds like this is sounding like somebody who would say, oh, it's, you're a white straight male, things are great for you. It's just like, no, for 95% of the population, it sucks ass all the time, period. That whatever privilege you think comes with race and or gender and or sexuality, honestly, pretty fucking minuscule in the grand scheme of things. There's occasionally some things here and there that might help you out, but honestly, not really.
It was shared that J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter books, donated £70,000 of her own money to helping fund this group and their challenge. She has had long...
Again, we can dislike it and the funding of it. Yeah. But again, if again, we do allow some degree of freedom of association and freedom of political belief, so dislike this, but I'm not sure. I don't think she's trying to say she should stop from doing this, but again, I hesitate to always throw out freedom of political belief whenever it is disagreeable. But I don't think that's really what she's doing here. Just, and also £70,000. Like, again, she's like 100 billionaire. She's incredibly rich, even despite giving away a lot of her wealth. She's still incredibly rich. So, honest to God, that's basically nothing.
Ties with this group, and in 2021 called these women her sisters. This is 70,000.
That is fine. Yeah, we can, again, guilt by association and support, we could kind of see. But again, people need to understand that good people can like bad people because that good person may only see or interact and engage with the good parts. And you might want to say, oh, this person should hate this person because they don't see the bad, because this person is bad. But it's just like, from their perspective, from their experiences, their lived experiences, they simply are not impacted by these things. So it's very difficult to hate somebody you're not impacted by. Now, empathy and all that kind of good stuff should come into play, and we should be engaging with that and using that to help inform our decisions. But again, this is a stone you can cast, but it's one that hits you as well. Because I guarantee you this person likes somebody that somebody else has an objectively true grievance against. And this person likes them and probably might even know that maybe it's another creator or a friend or somebody, has objectively done things that are harmful to others, that this person has a legitimate reason to hate them for, and you should, or are you going to respect that person's lived experiences and their suffering, or are you going to deny it? Don't know.
£1,000 that she's earned in royalties from the Harry Potter franchise from people who participate in that fandom financially, despite knowing as of.
So again, this is one of those things where if you financially support, if again, this is like this, you buy A funds X, X funds Y, ergo buying A funds Y. This function right here, I take probably the strongest stance against, in the sense that, again, this is basically saying nobody has any free will to spend their money on anything unless it is approved by the priestly class of moral goodness. Nobody has the right to, and again, this honestly cannot function. This kind of matrix cannot function, because paying taxes funds X. We know paying taxes will fund X plus Y plus Z. We'll write that X, Y, Z. Z is evil, ergo paying taxes is evil. Again, I pay taxes, state taxes and federal taxes. These things go to Medicare and Medicaid. These things go to homeless shelters. These things go to roadworks and construction. These things go to police officers and whatnot. And it also goes to military funding, and some of that military funding goes to supporting and sending weapons to Israel, which are then bombed on Palestine. Ergo, I am guilty of this, and I have to stop paying taxes. I can be frustrated with this, certainly, but this is one of those things where and eventually, even then, if I pay taxes, and let's just say Z isn't evil, I pay taxes that funds X, Y, and Z directly. And then Z funds G. G funds A1. A1 can lead to evil. So I can't pay taxes. I can't do that because this trickle-down effect, this moral trickle-down effect, the sins of the father pass on to the son, and vice versa. This kind of this unending de-evolution, or this unending chain of responsibility and consequence. I don't, there is no end to it. Again, if we look at her shelf, let's see.
2018, where her money goes to. So, congratulations.
So again, let's take a look over here. What's this? This is a figurine. Where'd she buy this figurine from? Where was that? Where did you get the figurine? Was this bought from any kind of store or anywhere that might have connections to China? And again, it might be one of those things where I buy A, A also, I buy something A. I buy A from B. B happens to also buy products from a country. This country does bad things. I cannot, so I have to find a new thing to buy. I can't buy from Amazon. I can't buy from, what do I do? More importantly, let's say this. Is the store store also connected? So if a store has Harry Potter books, you can't shop there. You cannot shop there because the store bought those books, sending money to the Harry Potter and the publisher, and that sends money to them. They bought it from the distributor. They bought that thing. And then they're going to sell it, and all of the sales, proceeds, or aspects of that, a small part of that, will eventually get back to J.K. Rowling. The store, making money off of these things, is allowed to continue to operate and sell your transgender affirming fictions. Looks like we got lots of very, very diverse, lots of LGBT kind of themes going on in the background. Great for you. And I'm sure some degree of black feminism to some degree. Okay. So everything is complicit in everything else. Now, this is not to say that it is completely and utterly useless all the times, but it is one of those things where taking, okay, well, just don't directly buy it. But again, this is at best performative. This doesn't actually change anything. The books are bought already. You not buying the book doesn't necessarily not end up, again, you're supporting the system. You are part of the system. You can do things to change the system, and you can bring awareness to some aspects of the system, but taking this accusatory, congratulations, you funded transphobia, this is what I have a problem with when it comes to this kind of ideological perspective, is that it is extremely almost myopic and anti-human, anti-anything, anti-market, anti-people, anti-capitalist, which I'm not too bad with the anti-capitalist thing, but it's even anti-socialism, anti-communism, it's anti-culture, it's anti-community. It is antithetical to social bonds existing, because I'm sorry, unless you are perfect beings, creating any kind of social, ideological, or emotional bond with another person provides benefit and sources for all aspects of that person, including the negative parts of it. So we have a problem here.
Once again, the conversation arose around consuming the Harry Potter IP, a conversation that has now expanded to include the fandom at large, things like fan fiction and fan art. For me, as someone who has spoken about this issue before, links everywhere, I have tried largely to support my trans colleagues and allow them to speak on this issue themselves and lead that conversation, especially since I don't consider myself to be a perfect ally. I think
so. This is another, this relates to kind of standpoint theory, in that those can't spell today, should be prioritized. I'm not in agreement with this. I have had very back and forth discussions with myself and others relating to standpoint theory, specifically kind of the more feminist versions of standpoint theory, and how members of specific ideological, or not ideological, but well, kind of ideological, but members of specific groups, like whether, again, when talking about issues relating to transgenderism, transgender voices should be centered and given special privilege when it's talking about concepts of gay or lesbian things. We should center those people. When it's talking blah, 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 we should center those people. I do not, I understand the theory behind this, and maybe we'll eventually dive back into it again on stream. We could do something like that and actually look at some of the foundational texts that talk about it. But I think that this is it's ultimately a closed circuit, almost circular logic thing. And it ends up going back to, it's the choir preaching to itself and preaching around itself. I do not enjoy this. I don't believe this. It's a small little nitpick there. It's a small little thing, but I have a visceral dislike for standpoint theory. Primarily because, again, it is so antithetical to any kind of discourse and communication, because it systemizes a privilege thing, and then while at the same time saying that, systems of hierarchy and privilege are kind of bad to a certain degree, and the ones that we have are bad, but mine are better. Mine are good because my particular thing is right and their God was wrong. And it's just like, I don't like it. Not my jam.
Considering yourself to be a perfect ally is just sort of like an ego stroking. And I do still read fan fiction. But I think we've reached a point in this entire conversation where cis people who still want to have a toe in this particular IP need to, quite frankly, get a harsh fucking reality check, because the shock that people
you're not a perfect ally. You still consume the fan fiction and people who still want to toe in this IP. I'm gonna be real honest. I think this is a really dumb argument. I just do think it's a really dumb fucking argument. And again, it strikes me as more religious and purity focused than any kind of actual anything that is actually based in any kind of good philosophical logic. This is just based on some kind of weird, I don't know. Like you talking about like not wanting to, not wanting to speak out of turn, and pure, not being a perfect ally, shit like that. I just disagree entirely. This is a long conversation to have, but I disagree entirely with this perspective. Oh, that cis people. Okay, well, what about the gay people? What about the transgender people who are also doing this? Oh no, we only, again, it always has to be kind of couched in terms of attacking the specific identity that's okay to be attacked. If this is problematic behavior, then it's problematic for everybody. Why center this? Oh, well, because these are the ones who make them more excuses. Maybe, but I think it would be more, what's more damaging? Somebody who's already inclined to be corrupted, doing corrupted things, or somebody who should have every excuse to not be corrupted by this, being corrupted by it? I.e., why would a transgender person still be engaging with this media? Oh, well, we don't want to shit on them. They're too weak. I don't know. Sounds patronizing and shitty to me. But again, this ideological perspective is antithetical for me. As far as I'm concerned,
need to still want to have a toe in this particular IP.
Again, you can't have your toe in this IP because it's evil. And she's probably going to go through a fair bit of analysis that's going to point out all the problems and evils of Harry Potter. And there's plenty of stuff to do and analyze about this. But two things I would say to this. One, too fucking bad. It's human nature. You are never going to find any product that has any ideological perfection. None whatsoever. Two, I think telling people to avoid engaging with this product, by necessity, will make the conversation about that product and the problematic nature of it ultimately moot and will destroy it, which isn't conducive for learning, because these people now, again, it's instead of understanding why they shouldn't engage with this, instead they'll just not engage with it because that's just what they've been told to do. And it'll fall out of fashion, and you might be okay with that, but then they don't have any learning or any kind of knowledge base to engage with future IP. So we just end up creating the same problem to where the IP will be fine until we tell it's not, and then we'll tell them it's not, then it'll die, and then a new IP, and we'll just kind of keep doing this, and we won't actually progress or learn, or nothing grows. So at best, this is just, again, just annoyance.
Need to, quite frankly, get a harsh fucking reality check, because the shock that people feel about this, about J.K. Rowling using her money this way, feels very disingenuous. This is J.K. Rowling's passion: harassment, bigotry, and then crying about it.
That doesn't sound right or fair or accurate. And I don't even like J.K. Rowling. I mean, I didn't like the books. So yeah, this kind of starts off on a bit of a rough foot, but that's okay. Again, it's done for entertainment purposes. She's preaching to her choir.
Peak white woman behavior. While
there needs to be a conversation eventually about the extreme levels of racism within Black social justice circles. The absolute this weird white woman, because this is only behavior that is displayed by white women, is not just wrong, not just weirdly like biological essentialist or race realist to a sense. It's just it is racist. It is genuinely racist. She's not doing this because she's white or because she's a woman, but she's also doing it because she is white and because she's a woman. There are many, many factors that go into here. Simplifying this down into peak white woman behavior, again, it is racism. There's lots of things that go into the calculus of why she does what she does, and the fact that you point out this and don't want to point out the other aspects, or you only point out the safe aspects, because again, she can't be doing this because she's a feminist, because that's not what feminism is. Because feminism I have defined as only the good parts that I acknowledge and I identify with, that I determined are good, even though somebody else could determine that some of the feminist aspects that I identify with are bad. They're obviously wrong. But when I identified certain aspects of feminism that are bad, I identified them as bad and then said they're not feminism because I identify as feminist. Because, notice again, this doesn't fucking work. Work it out in your brain. It doesn't work.
I'm going to link down below to the commentary of trans women specifically speaking about this topic, because I think it's important to highlight and uplift those voices. I am making this video because just the same way that people tend to believe race issues coming more from white people, hopefully me as a cis woman talking about this.
Yeah, I had a feeling this person kind of was pretty hardcore on this ideology. Yeah, this is strong standpoint theory, which is almost a meme version of standpoint theory, because it is so grotesquely kind of racist and sexist, and so essentialist to the point that yeah, I'm going to tap out at this one. There's probably a good comment, and maybe we'll do some more here, but I'm going to straight up tap out because I know where this is going to go. I've read the papers on this kind of stuff, and I'm perfectly fine to some degree with this ideological perspective existing. I'm fine with it. The problem is the reason why I'm having a difficulty sometimes with it lately is it comes back to that paradox of tolerance issue, is that this kind of ideological framework is utterly intolerant of anything that is counter to it. It cannot exist at all with anything that is not 100% involved in it. It simply can't. It will eventually turn and destroy it. This is one of the few things that, again, whether it was Jordan Peterson or Brett Weinstein or any of those drifting shitbirds right now who've just gotten lost in their own ideological intolerant bullshit. This is one of the few things initially when they first were coming out that they were 100% right about pointing out. This is a problem within. This is one of the aspects of the problem with certain social justice and or progressive movements. This same thing can be seen. It has a different flavor, different outlook, different perspective, different kind of thing on the right, which again, right now you could probably just look at Jordan Peterson now, and he's emblematic of many problems with the right or center right or libertarian kind of honestly just anti everything kind of movement, and how utterly intolerant they are of other ideological positions. Again, this position is just as extremist, just as awful. And again, this person won't care. They are a zealot. Zealots don't care when you point out their zealotry. They're proud of their zealotry. They're happy of their zealotry. They do not want to coexist with other people who disagree with them. Even if they only disagree with them 5%, 95% they are solid, they disagree on 5%. Eventually, it doesn't matter whether that 5% is correct or not. It is a narcissistic thing. I'm sorry, this is utterly narcissistic. It ends up just being a projection of your own personal desire and wants and whatever it is, however you want to phrase it, and it just doesn't work. So we're going to go ahead and stop it right there because this is going to devolve into nothing useful. We might pick this up maybe tomorrow, try to go through this, but I'll be honest, I don't see a lot of positive results coming from this, but we might pick this up tomorrow. We're going to go ahead and end the stream there. I know it's a little bit early, but I do want to get some work done. Hopefully we can get some writing actually done. But until, I suppose, tomorrow, it should be tomorrow. I don't see anything interfering on the schedule with tomorrow. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for hanging out. And until next time, and as always, I hope you have a good one. But let's continue.
Because I understand that people have questions. The problem is you're not actually opening your ears. Hello, as you can tell from the hair.
Again, this also then assumes if I don't agree with you, I'm not listening, which is another one of those kind of tenets that I disagree with. That could be a indication of a resistance to any kind of the ideas, certainly, but it also is an indication that they had the idea and they resisted it not because they didn't listen, but because they just didn't agree.
The nails and everything else. This was filmed later. This is part of the addendum. Between filming and editing things, stuff popped up, so I just wanted to come in, add a little bit of, information to what we're talking about. I also realized that I pronounced J.K. Rowling's name in the wrong way, but I did look it up, and she does not care, so I don't either.
Huh. It's an interesting thought. You pronounced the name wrong, but J.K. Rowling doesn't care, so I don't care. It's huh. Anyway, sorry, that's a side thought. I'm going to go with that. But I think it is an interesting. Again, you only care about things if other people care about them. This is absolutely picking a nit here. This is nitpicking to the nth degree, but it is interesting that one, you cared enough, or you're so hypersensitive to this, partly because maybe you speak on trans issues, and there is a hypersensitivity to the addressment and identity of people and the correct usage of, again, names, words, pronouns, that you felt compelled to even make a comment on this, like mispronounced it. Like, you could maybe make a small comment, just like a literally text thing, is like, I know I mispronounced Rowling's name, apologies. Or just whatever. But the fact that well, she doesn't care, that is also another thing that I find interesting, is that you don't care unless somebody else cares. It's just a small thing.
But so yeah, if you see this face, because we're adding in some more context to the story.
She says the.
So, but you know what? I want to run with that. Should you care about something relating to another individual if they, quote unquote, don't care? One, does J.K. Rowling care if her name is mispronounced? Now, I looked at it and she says she doesn't care. Well, did you actually talk to her directly? Or did you just kind of Google, hey, people have mispronounced the last name, does she care? And maybe she said in some interview that she's just not that big on that. The thing that I would then go with, well, just because an individual says they don't care doesn't mean that they don't care at all. Many people, transgender and many people of othering characteristics in society, have been forced to mask and forced to adapt to the normativity of their society and the norm, and have been forced, one of the things that I think is a fair observation, from kind of like a psychoanalytical perspective, when looking at otherness in society, is one of the things that normativity does is that it forces, like I said before, individuals who do not match up to this particular normativity to mask, to fake, to take on adaptation and kind of words like safety mode, certain strategies to avoid upsetting the norm that is happening. And one of them is being okay with shit, to put it colloquially, is basically always say, no, I'm fine. That's okay. It's all right. Don't worry about it. Anytime there is a mistake, anytime the society kind of steps on their toes, anytime that happens, rather than standing up for themselves or speaking truthfully about their feelings that, no, this isn't okay, I wasn't fine with this, they feel compelled through a lack of power or disempowerment or just general issues to, again, be okay with it. Now you might say, well, J.K. Rowling is very powerful. But it's like, well, power is a finite and tricky thing. Was she always powerful? No, she might not have always been powerful. And again, she's also a woman. And if we were to look into this from an intersectional perspective, one of the things feminism has talked about is that women are frequently asked to be okay with things, to not express their anger, frustration, to be very, again, the word is escaping me, but kind of conciliatory, very, very okay. Just okay with things. It's fine. It's okay. I'm not upset. Blah, blah, blah. Go with the flow. Don't speak up. Don't be a problem. And she may have embodied those characteristics, those kind of coping strategies, which again are not fair. They are imposed upon by society, and many feminists would suggest that this is not fair to do, to ask of women to do, to kind of stuff down their personal feelings and their personal needs and just kind of go with whatever is good with the group. So you somewhat passively and kind of jokingly reenacting the oppression of the society upon this woman who, even though still rich and powerful, intersectionality would still tell us there are aspects that would still oppress her, namely along the lines of gender. And more importantly, even if they are no longer oppressing her, she still is dealing with the lived experience and the damage of those lived experiences. You're continuing this tradition of, again, damaging, of harm, because you are, again, saying it's okay. What if it's not okay? What if she simply just says it's okay because she doesn't feel comfortable or powerful or feel it's appropriate, or because she's been taught to say, don't correct people? I might even think that. I mean, again, this isn't even something that is particular to women. Anybody who has a name that has even the slightest bit of difficulty being pronounced, oftentimes will just go, nah, it's okay, call me whatever. I am one of those people. My name is not particularly difficult to pronounce, but it can be, especially for any English second language individuals. Any of all. There tends to be a difficulty pronouncing my name. And because it is a slightly longer name and maybe a less common name now than it was in the past, people don't remember it. And it's also a name that has two different diminutive forms, two different shortened diminutive forms that people use that are either themselves common names or, again, common shortens of themselves. So that's an issue. I got okay with it, and maybe I shouldn't be okay with it, but I am okay with it. It doesn't cause me psychological harm anymore. But again, that's not the point of many of these critical theory kind of things. It's just because it technically doesn't cause any more harm. That's not because it's not harmful. That's because the person has built up a callus and a scar and scar tissue over the psychological harm that has been caused by society asking of them. So if you're going to be a principled person following your own principles, being aware of this, you should probably not be okay with you doing this. So you making this jokingly insertion here, this is somewhat problematic because, one, it shows that you are cognitively aware of this issue rather than just, being something that is caused by a normative blindness, we might say, from the power group or the group that is not affected by this particular microaggression. You do see this, and then you go, yeah, but she doesn't care, or at least she says she doesn't, so I'm not going to care. If you're, what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Idea came to her mysteriously, and in a flash, a fully formed boy took shape in her head.
J.K. Rowling first published Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in 1997. If you were in the United States, it was published under Sorcerer's Stone because they didn't think that American kids would know what a philosopher was.
Yeah.
Because it was too archaic, according to Scholastic. And deadass, that's a little bit disrespectful. However, I would...
kind of, but I've been dealing with enough kids whose reading skills are pretty low. Like, yeah, they're not... I don't know. I agree. Yeah, it's honestly, that's an interesting topic on itself. The weird translations and change in titles or whatever across books in different countries and cultures. It's a weird. There's just weird justifications for it. But I agree with her. It's kind of funny.
Will concede that the UK title is better and makes more sense. The Philosopher's Stone is something that already existed in fantasy.
Yep.
But part of the appeal of Harry Potter is that they don't really have to have a broad understanding of fantasy to be able to access the book. So I get going from philosopher to sorcerer. That book and the subsequent 6 went on to become a massive phenomena in publishing that has yet to be truly replicated.
Yeah. I remember there was Potter Fever. Very annoying. I actually didn't give a shit when it was being published. It was not my jam. I didn't care. I didn't read Harry Potter until I think I was in college. I just didn't give a shit. And then I did read it, and I was bored. It was fine, I guess. Meh.
The series has sold over 60 million copies, translated into over 70 languages, and is sold in over 200 countries.
God, $20 for a book. These days, I feel like they're more like 25. But all right.
The New York Times Children's Literature Bestsellers list was created because of the popularity of this particular book series. It would then spawn successful movies that have generated over $7 billion for Warner Brothers, and is now getting a TV reboot, but we'll put a pin in that. We will get back to that later. The franchise has also produced pretty okay but kind of meh video games and a collection of studio parks and tourist attractions across the United
Yeah, it's an IP. I would probably agree with the video games. Again, I never liked or played much of the video games. Didn't find them that interesting. The only one I played somewhat to some degree, even though I found the story painfully fucking boring, and honestly, it's kind of a dead game. What is it? Hogwarts, the most recent one, where you kind of open world, you create your character, and it's back in the past, and maybe I should replay that and play that, or continue off from where I left off. But the combat wasn't terrible. The spells weren't bad. Like, it was a fine universe jump in, but it's just kind of a lot of mediocre stuff that is wrapped around a story that is kind of meh. Like, it's not bad. It's just really fucking poorly paced and boring as shit, honestly. Maybe I'll go back and finish it.
Kingdom, and particularly in Scotland. Forbes reported that J.K. Rowling's biggest cash cow now, outside of the books, is actually Universal Studios' Wizarding World's attraction. Millennials and younger are the biggest bulk of the fan base, because we literally grew up with the series. It, like Star Wars, was popular enough, despite being nerdy and in a niche genre, that it crossed over, that everyone consumed it. There became a shared cultural language in many ways around these characters. People teach classes using Harry Potter as a touchstone.
Yeah. Though, that is very much, again, the reason why they use it to teach is, again, just based on the interest dynamic, is that they feel like it might be more relatable and or comfortable for students to begin teaching critical reading and critical thinking skills and analysis, and just generally they're more acceptable. There's a lot of reasons to do this. Again, I'm not disagreeing with her, just kind of elaborating a little bit more. They're very simplistic written, and I would say, like, oh, it became super popular even though it's nerdy. It's just like, it's not untrue, but I think there's still this kind of meme that there's nerdy stuff that cannot break into the mainstream, and this is one of those things where, like, the nerds and then there's the normies, blah blah blah. I actually don't think that divide has ever been super strong, at least not for a very long time. We're talking like 70s and 80s. Like, Star Wars broke that wall pretty massively. So, like, this idea of, oh, it's so great that it crossed this boundary. It's like, just look at that. By 96, 97, 98, when these books are coming out, like, that boundary wasn't like that wall wasn't much. Like that wall was like a 2 foot high, broken, like one of those ancient goat walls or whatever, or sheep walls that you might see in Scotland or whatever, that are made of stone and stacked stone, but one that's just been smashed and in disrepair. Like that, the crossover was bridged. That Rubicon was crossed a long time ago. And it was breached long ago. So that's not really like a super like unique feature of Harry Potter. But
That naturally has made Rowling and Warner Brothers a lot of money. J.K. Rowling is one of the richest people in the world and the second highest paid author after James Patterson. With the former
I hate James Patterson. I don't think he doesn't write his books anymore. I'm pretty sure it's well known at this point, but he doesn't really write his books. The vast majority of them he doesn't write. What he does is he comes up with general sketch ideas, like napkin kind of idea shit, and then he gives it to in-house studio writers who do his style, and they write them. That's why he's able to produce so much over such a long period. I don't think he does a lot of his writing anymore. That might be a bit of me being a bit conspiratorial, and maybe I'm believing maybe I drank the Kool-Aid and I'm believing a fantasy, a conspiracy there. But that's one that I've been fairly comfortable with for now, is that shit Patterson does not write his shit. A lot of it is ghost written.
now having spent the last 7 years making her anti-trans stances the overwhelming part of her public branding.
So this is one of those things where that she is making it her overall marketing branding. I would disagree in the framing of this. I don't think J.K. Rowling is intentionally making this her branding. I think the resistance to her doing this is kind of washing away anything and everything else that she may do. And again, we can see this is somewhat logical, is that when you are being pressed on one particular issue really hard, but you have a belief in it, you tend to focus more of your energies on this in response to that pressure. So on that, focus your energies to this particular point in response to that pressure. So this framing of that she is making this choice completely independent of everything else, that all she wants to do is this is what she's spending her money on all the time, everywhere, I don't believe that is true. And again, the resistance to this does inspire more of that, and this is why I think when you are resisting, or when you are kind of doing social justice activism, stuff like that, this is kind of I'm not saying that you should be more careful about this or not. I'm just saying, like, look, this is going to be a natural thing. Like, the more you press on this, the more they're going to press back. Even if they don't, even if they have many different things that they could focus on, this is one of those things where, especially because there is pressure against them, somebody is telling them no. That's the fastest and surest way to get somebody to do something, is to tell them not to do it. They will just do it out of spite. They will do it because of the resistance, because of that demand, even if they don't technically want to do it. Which is why oftentimes, again, this is the curse of modern society. And again, I'm still working on the long form essay I want to do on this, but convenience is is like the ultimate psychological manipulative tactic. Is if you can make it more convenient, subtle, small, convenient changes, those are so goddamn hard, especially if it's convenient as hell, and even like slightly positive, but super easy, super convenient. Any changes that end up falling under that, they're a lot harder to remove because it's convenient. Humans are creatures of comfort, and we're creatures of habit, and we're creatures of laziness. We really like things that are convenient. And if there's a bush closer to us with berries versus a tree full of fruit, and the fruit is better, but the berries are closer, again, if it's too difficult or more convenient, whatever which way you would want to phrase this, to get the berries and it's too difficult to go get the fruit, we'll eat the berries. So on and so forth. So this, you're making her acceptance or non-acceptance of the transgender so inconvenient, and you're making it something to point out. Again, so that's oftentimes why, if you can't be convenient and you can't be nice about things, be fast with them. If you can bash through and get actual claims quickly before there's a lot of protest, before there's a lot of noise, you just slip in there, do a radical change, and then just walk away. Oftentimes, if you can do this, keep the attention down, people will just go, well, okay, I guess that's the way it is. There's no fervor, there's no impetus, there's no emotional or psychological kind of activation, so there's nothing to work on. There's nothing for them to grasp. They'll just go, well, I guess that's the way it is, and they move on. This is difficult because, again, the second you make that change, there are going to be forces that are going to find this and immediately try to make this into an issue. Again, that's kind of an issue that happened with the transgenderism. So this was unfortunate, but just kind of an observation is that, again, I do want to push a small bit back on this, is that there needs to be an accountability of all sides on this, that part of the reason why J.K. Rowling has become more extreme is because her response to this, or the response she got from her comments, was very, very over the top. She's still an asshole, and her comments actually do have major problematic issues to them, but so does everybody's about almost anything. I don't think I've ever come across an individual who hasn't had an opinion or stance, whether they're transgender, cisgender, black, white, Asian, Mexican, Latino, whatever, anywhere, rich, poor. Everybody usually has something, at least one thing, oftentimes many things, to where they are just genuinely really wrong about that shit. And you just have to navigate that with some degree of grace, or you're just going to end up fighting.
Overwhelmingly so, which has been especially harmful and damaging because of what Rowling represented. There have always been criticisms of Rowling's writing, but she was known as a left-leaning activist for the majority of her career, frequently giving to charities, especially ones surrounding domestic violence, advocating for immigration, and being a major philanthropist. Her series, whatever you think of the writing or now in retrospect, was a life raft for many people across the world. Some of the words she wrote.
So this is another small issue that I've often had when it comes to this kind of criticism, especially the criticism that really ties itself to kind of the moral aspect of writing and its effects. Explicitly looking at harm, care kind of aspects of the writing process and the reading process, because it ends up putting writers on this pedestal that nobody can fucking survive. And it ends up putting the writing itself, it deifies it to this weird degree, so that then when there's a small disagreement or even a larger disagreement or an issue with the author or with the writing or something like that, oftentimes it goes back to the author, there's this massive backlash, this massive, you betrayed us, you were supposed to be the chosen one, you're supposed to bring balance to the force, not destroy it and leave it in darkness, crying, weeping, as we cut your arms and legs off and throw you into fucking lava. This is kind of that problem of, again, deifying work. And again, everybody deified. Like, I don't, this is not necessarily on J.K. Rowling that she wasn't godlike and perfect in all things. One, it's never going to happen. No matter how perfect or awesome she tried to be, there would be something, because no matter what, somebody's going to find something that they don't jive with to some degree. And I'm going to be honest, again, you're talking about this is like, oh, some people had problems with her writing prior to this. I am going to really push back on that one, because J.K. Rowling, I do remember reading more than a few essays and people talking about it and examinations, whether it was coming from the post-colonialist theorists, the critical race theorists, even feminist theorists, is that her writing got torn to shit back and forth for not being ideologically pure and good and awesome across the board. And that's fine. That's what happens with the writing. But the issue is that when I or someone else might do that, I'm very rarely making it a moral argument. And if I am bringing it up in there, I usually try to include or try to put forth, especially if somebody asks me about it, put forth the understanding that just because this has morally bad aspects to it does not define it entirely. There's too much complexity here. It may seem like it becomes the entire story, but that's due to the fact that you have to narrow focus and create a specific narrowed thesis when you're making an argument. You can't talk about everything all the time, all at once in your argument, in your essay, in your book, whatever it is. You have to specifically target certain characteristics, ideas, concepts, and apply them as such, analyze them as such, so on and so forth. So if you read an essay that looks at J.K. Rowling from a I don't know, feministic lens or something like that, looking at its representation of girls and young women, blah blah blah, it makes, like a magnifying glass, it makes every single flaw so much larger than they are, so that you can understand the nature of that flaw and how it works. But that doesn't mean you throw it away. Doesn't mean that you also ignore the flaw. It just means, well, quite frankly, nothing from a moralistic standpoint. Because I honestly, I don't know if I agree anymore with analyzing literature through the morality lens, specifically in the sense that it is a moral teacher, and or we should hold it to immoral kind of laws and regulations almost. I don't find this. So again, this kind of thing to where like, oh, this was a safe haven for so many people. It's just like this. Yeah, that is true. And people found lots to love about this, and that's great. But that's your fanaticism, hence being a fan. That's your own fanatical over indulgence, over kind of involvement. There's a term in there in psychology that I'm trying to remember, but basically it's the idea of, again, you are deliberately placing too much of your emotional, maybe it's codependency or dependency, something like that, is that to a unhealthy degree, you are placing your emotional and psychological well-being, safety, and all that into an area that, or into a person, or into a thing, or a process that cannot possibly responsibly take care of this. It's just not, it's not possible for it to do this. And it is a form of psychological and emotional abuse to do this. It's oftentimes difficult to see, but it is a form of, kind of, in relationships, it's a form of abuse, to where you are so dependent upon your other, your significant other, for your emotional well-being and sense of self and all these things, that it puts too much pressure on them, that it is abusive to where everything that starts going wrong, if they do not have any independence or if they disagree slightly with you or there's anything like that, that where they want to express their own sense of self and it doesn't validate your existence, you have an absolute fit and you are emotionally distraught. This is emotionally manipulative. And that's part of the reason why I find this very tricky, in the sense that I do want authors to not write explicitly cruel and mean works to some degree, but I also understand that that's a demand that's not sure if it's fair or even accomplishable, and it often leads to problematic elements all on their own. So this thing of the way she's bringing this up, it's not necessarily that I 100% disagree with her. I think what she's saying is like technically wrong, not at all. What I'm saying is, hold on, I hit a button. You get the fuck over here. Hold on. Where'd it go? Or sorry, on my end, a screen disappeared. So I couldn't see something. All right. Apologies. There we are. All right, let's go back to it. Again, this is a long diatribe, sorry on my part, but again, this is a fundamental issue that, this is really quiet. You guys probably can't even hear what she's fucking saying. My apologies. I can hear her. But let's back up here.
Philanthropist. Her series, whatever you think of the writing or now in retrospect, was a life raft for many people across the world. Some of the words she wrote resonated and helped queer people come out, including trans people.
So again, like it helped them come out. I would also disagree with that more from a philosophical kind of sense, is that, is this what helped them come out, or is more the fandom surrounding this helped it come out? Because again, that's the issue here, is that the book is being held to not only what's in the text and the ideologies and the philosophies and the beliefs within the text, but also she is responsible some degree for the fan ideologies and the culture within there. And this is, in this case, being a positive attribution. But again, anything that has a positive attribution can also be a negative. You put your belief in God and, you give worship and thanks to the God. But if the God disappoints you, you destroy the God. And again, if it is not perfect, then it is not God and it falls. So this, they found comfort in this and they came out because they found comfort in, for the most part, in a world that was relatively accepting of quirkiness. So the themes of difference and quirkiness, that's all nice, and they found something like that. But I would suggest that it was more the socialization and more the community that was built up through the fandom that would help them. So again, I love the idea of how literature can have an effect to some degree. I do love this, but this is a massive kind of problem because, again, sometimes you just want to write something to express your own idea, and sometimes you want to write something to entertain another individual or a group of individuals or things, so you simply write for entertainment. Sometimes you write for more purposeful things. Sometimes you write to try to convince people to be better and good, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes you do a little bit of all at the same time. But this, again, the moral outlook that examines this and this kind of pigeonholes it into only looking at the effects of the writing can be a little bit, I don't know, obsessive to an unhealthy degree. And I think, honestly, that's been the biggest damage, is the reason why J.K. Rowling's betrayal of the trans community is so damaging is because, quite frankly, y'all put way too much stock in her. Stop stop turning your hero, stop turning everybody you like or has even the slightest bit of positive attention towards you into this god. You have to stop doing that. Like, again, it's unhealthy. I see this in online communities all the time, in like even streamer communities and stuff like that, to where all of a sudden you have these streamer wars between the fans, and the fans, like, snark pages start being built up because mostly because they love one streamer and they hate the other, and any disagreement between those streamers they then kind of take into themselves and turn into this really fucking weird shit. I don't know. It's an unhealthy obsession. Um, Again, this isn't necessarily blaming them outright, any of these communities, for feeling this pain and harm, but partly it is a bit of blame. I am blaming them a little bit. Like, I can understand why you obsessively and perhaps hyper focused on this and perhaps put too much stock into this. I can understand that, but it's still on you. You did that. It sucks, but kind of you did it to yourself here.
When she wrote, "Sometimes we sort too soon," in the book by Dumbledore to Snape, in reference to the sorting hat that puts 11-year-olds into Hogwarts houses that are meant to represent different dominant personality traits, something, you maybe shouldn't do to a 12-year-old.
Yeah, but my small comment here is that this is something that, quite frankly, okay, you're not supposed to do to a 12-year-old. Okay, but should you do that to an adult? Because adults themselves are changed and complex things, so why you're sorting people? It's okay to do it as an adult. And she might say, well, no, it's not. But it's like, yeah, but you are. This is the whole point of a lot of, like, whether it's critical race theory or often critical theories, there's a degree of extreme essentialism that happens with this kind of analysis that, again, will go on.
It was a sentiment that many queer people could and still do understand. That is what has made what happened to her such a deep and personal betrayal to so many. Of course, there is the point that this series never actually interrogates this at depth and plays into the binary nature of these houses on a morality scale until the very, very, very end.
Yeah, because it's a kid's tale and they grow up. I kind of felt like, well, say what you will about um her writing style and her overall theme, but it's fairly obvious that the theme matures as the kids mature. So yeah, by the time they're hitting their, late teens, they're going to graduate, the whole landscape of good and evil, Slytherin versus Gryffindor and all these stereotypes changes. Like, that's not a like you pointed out, like this is somehow like a fault of the book. Kind of seems to miss that. I'm pretty sure that was kind of a main idea of the book, like one of those meta narrative aspects. Maybe I was giving too much credit to J.K. Rowling with that, but, like, yeah, kind of it. Confused why you were. Well, okay.
But I digress. Part of why this transphobia has been so dramatic of a change is because it felt so disjointed from who Rowling had been politically. What is true to the fandom consistency part of this conversation is the aversion to having any in-depth conversations about the problematic things written in the book series itself. In the years before the issue of Rowling's transphobia in
So, well, we'll let her actually continue. I do have this idea of, again, the resistance to dealing with problematic elements.
conversations about the series, there had always existed some areas of criticism about Rowling and her work. The casual fat phobia, especially when it came to people who were good fat or bad fat. If you are a good character, you are warm and cute, but if you are bad, it is disgusting and an expression of excess or taking up space in a bullying way. The weird writing around the mythology of the house elves. House elves are on the one hand inspired by brownies, actual creatures from Celtic mythology, but then became a messy allegory for actual slavery.
I'm a brownie. I clean houses.
Before you devour the inhabitants?
I try to stay out of the way. Mostly I work at night. So quiet, you won't even know I'm there.
Brownies in mythology are fey creatures that clean homes at night, but are very easily offended if not treated well, and will leave homes that forget to treat them properly. They have a lot of autonomy in that way. House elves, other than Dobby, very much fit this dynamic of wanting to do work. However, Dobby does want to be free and is represented in a way that makes his situation look more aligned with slavery or indentured servitude. So when we get storylines like Hermione's SPEW, the narrative is confusing in how it handles this issue by treating her with a sense of mockery for not.
Again, this is there's just it doesn't work. This ideological purity thing doesn't work because it doesn't allow for any kind of presentation, does not match up perfectly with your ideological bias. So again, why is Hermione treated to some degree with dismissal and mockery? Well, we could go back to what's one of the major themes of the books. One of the major themes of the books is maturity and maturing and growing. Again, Hermione is, when she starts out, what we might kind of term as a baby activist. She is very, very passionate about this, but some degree immature about her goals, her focus, and the technical ability of this. Though not to again, it's there's some critique of it, but for the most part, good-hearted, well-intentioned. And she's kind of mocked by this because when you try to tell 12, 13, 14-year-old kids, like, you know, it's like the same reason why plenty of kids in school mocked Greta Thunberg for her environmentalism, because they're immature dicks. Like, what did you want them to all be okay with it? Did you want the narrative to immediately focus more on this, that to the exclusion of any other kind of things? Again, you might say, oh, she's just bringing it up as a small little side thing. It's like this, yeah. Because quite frankly, I'm sorry, that happens a lot when you're also a child, is that some things become very, very important for a semester or two, and then they're dropped, or they become less emphasized due to other pressures, and so on and so forth. Like, I don't think this is what the fact that you're kind of recontextualizing something that is not that particularly, like, literarily interesting. Like, I don't want to. I'm not giving props or kind of credit to J.K. Rowling, because this is pretty bog standard, writing immature characters. So this thing like this, oh, these characters didn't immediately turn into these abolitionist movement, and we didn't immediately sidestep the big long thing about Voldemort and Chosen Ones or anything like that. Not screw that. I just want to now deal with this particular political social thing, and I want to be validated on this 100%. It's just like that. Like, you can't take the small victory. Why does this issue have to take center stage? Oh, because it's very, very important. It's super, super, super important. Kind of, but also, no, sorry, there are thousands of things that are important in this world. Hundreds of billions of thousands of things. Immeasurable amount. And a writer can't possibly address to the extent and depth every single theme that you want them to do. And even the ones that are united in our ideological framework, or in this ideological framework, is ones who's really done a really good job dealing with them. I've read some of those works, fiction and whatnot, where this kind of perspective say these people are so amazing at dealing with things. And I've read them and I'll be like, there's still a lot that they don't address particularly effectively or well. And honestly, there's other problematic elements that I could dissect from that perspective. I don't, because that's not really perspective that I care to attack from. But again, this again, she's bringing up this kind of history of, again, the shit that she was getting. But let's be, again, if we look at it from this perspective, and the response she got from this, again, she did get a fair amount of shit from people. And again, when it comes to this, and I'm sure she's going to bring up the goblins, and that kind of aspect. But like, in this kind of very politically charged and morally charged critical analysis, and from those fans that were particularly involved in that thing, she got tons of hate. And I say hate, not critique. She got hate. Absolutely hate, because again, the fact that she was a white woman who is now rich was starting to override any of their joy or love for the story, because again, they essentialize things, and her identity started becoming more of a factor for these people than the actual text. So this is one of those things where I really wish some self-reflection would come about from this form of analysis, but I just don't see it.
Understand that they don't want to be free, but then they've established this as a horrible situation where these creatures are being abused. So, which one is it? Nearly all of.
Now you're upset about complexity. Again, why it is at best, you could say it's somewhat half. Again, and let's be honest, she might have just had the house elves in there, just as, again, it's a children's story without any complexity. She wasn't really thinking too much about it, but again, as you're writing the series and as she's wanting completed, as the kids are maturing, and as your writing naturally has to mature to this, you start thinking, oh, well, shit, I have set up the house elves as, this does seem to have some kind of vague allegorical reference to slavery, but they're also magical creatures. They don't follow the same boundaries and the same laws as humans do. I don't want them to do that. And again, that's one of my biggest issues, that when you do something like this, to where you want the moral framework to always fit to the lived experiences of our particular historical thing, you end up leading to less creativity and more moral gospel writing. And that, rather than this being an exploration of strangeness, weirdness, combinations that we never really have seen in real life, that might seem counterproductive, but because of XYZ reasons it works in this particular way, or issues that are contradictory, but they somehow work here because of magic or some shit, throw something in there just to play around with the ideas. Again, this moralization deifies and turns these ideas into these golden calves that cannot be touched, and that have to be always in the same form. Even if they say that, oh no, I don't want it to be in the same form, it's like this, yeah, but spiritually and essentially they're always the same form. Always. And if they aren't, you automatically go, this is wrong and evil. It goes back to that wager of morality in the fiction kind of thing, is that I find this perspective really narrowy.
Rowling's non-white characters have horrible names, serve very disposable roles in the plot. There is really no relevant non-white character in the stories.
So I don't care. You might say this is a privilege of me, blah blah blah, my whiteness, blah blah blah, but I just collectively don't fucking care about the race of the character I'm reading. half the time I don't even know what it is, and I don't even care. It just doesn't fucking mean much to me. Now, to be more critical in this thing, I can understand for, again, identification issues and people connecting to things that they see in themselves or wanting to see themselves reflected. But again, this also then leads to another issue, or leads back to the over kind of burdening of the text with your own personal and psychological and ideological wish fulfillment and desire. Want the text to reflect you so goddamn bad that when it doesn't, perceive that lack of reflection as bad. Oh, but it doesn't have any, but all fiction doesn't have these things. So write it. And more importantly, oh, the popular fiction doesn't have that. So make the non-popular fiction that does have it popular. Read it. This is one of my fundamental issues, is that there is tons of stuff out there, or a good number of stuff written by authors of color who absolutely centralize color perspective and do this and make them important to the story. They do this, and they've been doing this for decades. For decades and decades, this has been happening. They're not incredibly popular, and some of them are lost to time to a certain degree, though they're still out there. But go find it. Go read it. This weird. Again, J.K. Rowling wrote what she knows, what she experiences, what she feels. And look, I'm sorry, they're part of the thing that we have to understand is that we do live in a semi-racially divided world that oftentimes excludes the experiences of the other from each other. Whether it's through like the literal ghettoization of individuals and redlining or whatever it is, this happens. And criticizing them for something that they really oftentimes don't have a ton of control over, and then saying, you didn't include this perspective here. So, oh, okay, it just wasn't in my mind. It's not in my experience. Again, this wouldn't be bad. You could absolutely do it, but I do feel like this criticism receives a degree of moral condemnation that is unwarranted by the crime, and it's primarily done because, again, this weird projection, this codependency, this emotional manipulation, this deification process just puts way too much goddamn weight on any author to be able to do anything without pissing somebody off so badly that they all of a sudden are now persona non grata. Oh, these characters of color didn't have anything to do and they weren't consequential, blah, blah, blah. I again, I could understand this from a very academic standpoint, but at a certain point, I feel like even mentioning or trying to imply the moral aspect of this, it's not fair to the author, and it's not healthy.
Which, is disappointing, but not shocking. There are the anti Semitic.
It's disappointing, but not shocking. Again, condescension. If it's not shocking and you know this was going to be happening, why would you be disappointed? Like, oh, I wanted this to be better and more special. But if you knew that there was a high likelihood of it not being that way, then you got your hopes up, then they were dashed, and now you're disappointed. Well, it's not anybody's fault but your own. Now we're going to talk about the anti-Semitic tropes with the goblins. I would say there's some degree of this, but again, the mythology of goblins has some degree of tie to, again, anti-Semitism, but there also has plenty of ties that are not anti-Semitic, that were simply, again, prejudicial against other behaviors and other peoples. So the immediate essentialization of certain characteristics as being representative of X, Y, or Z, I have some problems with, but we'll leave it off for now.
Tropes, and of course, how mean the books are to women who do not fit a particular standard of being pretty, but not intimidating, but also smart. Fleur Delacour getting shitted on by everybody in the fourth and fifth book is a clear example of that. People who
Again, I don't know what people like this kind of want, because they say they always want like complexity, where they want real life, they want, the real world issues being dealt with. But I think they actually want a really simplistic and pigeonholed kind of thing, to where good always wins, and good is always defined by what they like, and it always wins perfectly. And you know it's like that classic trope of the student who challenges the teacher on some social issue or whatever, and the teacher fights back, but then the student makes this great rousing argument, and everybody claps for them, and the teacher's left fuming. They want this really, really morally dogmatic, and again simplistic framework. And it's like this: oh, Floor gets shit on in these books. Yeah. Again, kids. I don't know if you remember kids and teenagers, but they're assholes who will point out and talk shit about anything that's different. Sorry. But yeah. What do you want? They're weird. From the normative perspective, they're weird, and weirdness is always treated to some degree with contempt. That is the way it is. So unless you want her to write a fantasy that is just weird wish fulfillment kind of fantasy, to where it is completely and utterly disconnected from reality, and this just seems to be, this is not just nitpicking the story. This is, again, almost prejudicially attacking the books from a very, very, very narrow and self-righteous ideological position that just, again, it grinds my gears a little bit. But let's let her go.
read fantasy, especially children's fantasy, had always pointed out how derivative the series was of older works that were more niche. For example, I remember when I finally watched The Worst Witch and being very kind of like, not shocked, but very aware of the comparisons between it and Harry Potter.
I'm sure you want to.
Well, yeah, like it is derivative. Yeah, that's a fair criticism. Absolutely.
School to pass this inspection just as much as we do, Mildred, and given your tendency to cause calamity, it would be preferable to keep you out of the inspector's way.
What do you mean, Miss Harper?
Hide you.
Sci-fi writer Ursula K. Le Guin once commented when asked about comparisons between her Earthsea books to Rowling's series. What's the difference between being influenced by a body of work and admitting it, and being influenced by a body of work and not admitting it? This last is a situation, as I see it, between my A Wizard of Earthsea and J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. I didn't originate the idea of a school for wizards. If anybody did, it was T.H. White, though he did it in a single throwaway line and didn't develop it. I was the first to do that.
That's an interesting kind of thought that I'm not sure on that. Is Ursula K. Le Guin the first to kind of do any degree of elaboration and kind of looking at school life in the sense of like the school for wizards? Was she the first to do that? She might have been, in the sense that it was very school academic like, because there's always been kind of institutes where one goes to learn. But was she the first? And I'm not sure if I disagree or agree with that. I'm not quite sure. But she certainly did a popular version of it, I'd say.
Years later, Rowling took the idea and developed it along other lines. She didn't plagiarize. She didn't copy anything. Her book, in fact, could hardly be more different from mine. In style, spirit, everything. The only thing that rankles me is her apparent reluctance to admit that she ever learned anything from other writers. When ignorant critics praised her wonderfully original in inventing the idea of a wizard
Originality in inventing
school, and some of them even seemed to believe that she had invented fantasy, she let them do so. This, I think, was ungenerous.
So I'm not sure if I 100% agree with Ursula K. Le Guin here. I might push back a little bit on this, just slightly. Is again, it feels a little sour grapes here. It feels a little bit of jealousy, a little bit of irritation, which again I can understand. I don't think Harry Potter should be as popular as it is from a stylistic standpoint, but going on this, when ignorant critics praised her wonderful originality in inventing the idea of a wizard's school. So I believe there is originality to her. Again, she is very derivative of other works, certainly. But again, like you're upset that popular critics, and I wouldn't even call them critics, but popular pop culture critics and pop culture interviewers, who don't know any of the history, gassing her up for this new thing that they've found it's not particularly new, and then saying, "Oh, she should have attributed him. She let them do so." I mean, it does feel just sour grapes here. One, you're assuming that she 100% knows her work. Now, maybe this is true. I haven't taken a look at this, but one, to prove this is one that she absolutely has said, I taken inspiration from Wizardiversity, and I read these books, and I wanted to write my own thing on this, blah, blah, blah. But it could very well be that she didn't really do a lot of that. She just kind of thought, hey, I want to write a primary school kind of children's book, but I want it to be with wizards and magic and shit, and just did that. Like, it's ungenerous and in the long run unwise. I'm gonna disagree a little bit with Le Guin here.
And in the long run, unwise. Shout out to Ursula K. Le Guin. Read The Dispossessed.
Like, I do like Le Guin. I do like her. I think she's a pretty solid writer. But I do feel like, again, there's a degree of sour grapes and a degree of, if funny enough, the outsider here is that J.K. Rowling is the outsider from the intellectual and the scientific writing community and the fantasy writing community that is coming across here. Like, she didn't get her bona fides, she didn't go through enough, and she's not giving proper credit to us. There feels to be a little bit of ironically of them again being upset that any outsider would write about a thing that they are writing about and engaging with. But all right.
Le Guin also said in 2004, I have no great opinion of it, the Harry Potter books. When so many adult critics were carrying on about the, quote, incredible originality of the first Harry Potter book, I read it to find out what the fuss was about, and remained somewhat puzzled. It seemed a lively kid's fantasy, crossed with a, quote, school novel, good fare for its age group, imaginatively derivative, and ethically rather mean-spirited.
So again, I don't disagree with anything that Ursula K. Le Guin is saying right here. The ethically mean-spirited, again, this is one of those things where from the highly politicized, the political writer who is absolutely intending on moral, ethical change in the world, anybody who does not meet their standard or who does not do it to the same degree of fervent passion and zealotry is mean-spirited. So this isn't a statement of truth in the sense of objective truth. This is just a perspective statement that reveals more about Ursula K. Le Guin's perspective and writing style than it does about any objective notion about writing, I would say.
I am not someone, or at least I try not to be someone, who has decided retroactively that the books have no literary value. I have literally helped be part of a Harry Potter class when I was in college that I helped teach and proctor. The books have value, as do most books. But if you look at them just critically as a text, you can tell that there is a massive disconnect between the first few books and the last set. You can tell that there are ideas and threads that Rowling starts with and puts together that do not pay off in any kind of way. There are so many plot holes, missed opportunities, incomplete character arcs, a lack of real world building when it comes to the magic legal system.
Yeah, they're not very good. Yeah, they aren't. They never would. There's no disagreement here.
The blood purity stuff, all of it's just very lazy allegory when you dig a little bit deeper. And a lot of the character relationships are just never touched on in ways that could add more depth and originality and care to a series that wants to say so much about World War II and the rise of fascism while not really.
Does it actually want to say a lot about it? That's where I'm going to take a small little detour here, is that I don't think there was a lot that wanted to be say about it. I think she touches upon lots of teeny little bits in here, but again, it's a pop culture kind of very commercial. I just want to write about, the school stuff, and I'm just going to grab everything around me, spaghetti hit the wall, see what sticks, and just kind of touching upon all these tons of little cultural and historical things. But I just want to touch upon them because I don't really care. It's my light flavoring. And I don't think it wanted to do anything other than tell a mildly entertaining story about a boy and school and magic wizard shit and a standard hero's journey like arc of magic boy chosen one destroys bad guy. Like, I really am struggling. Like, it just feels like you are again projecting onto here. Well, why else would you bring up these things if you didn't want to talk about them? Because it's commercial bullshit. It's capitalism 101. Like, it's just the barest little reference catch-all. Like, it's not that deep, and it wasn't designed or intended to be that deep. I really don't think so.
Getting any of it. For example, the Black sisters Narcissa Malfoy, Bellatrix Lestrange, and Andromeda Tonks are based off of the Mitford sisters. The Mitford sisters were part of a sibling group of 6 sisters and a brother from an aristocratic British family that had become very culturally relevant during the 1930s, with 2 sisters, Diana and Unity, becoming fascists, like capital F fascists, and Hitler supporters. One, Jessica, becoming a communist. Another, Nancy, a moderate socialist and novelist. Deborah, a liberal socialite. And finally, Pamela, an alleged lesbian. Because with those numbers, there's got to be one in the family. Fun fact, Jessica's daughter went on to marry a Black Panther, and their child is James Foreman Jr., a prominent Black academic who wrote Locking Up Our Own and is the co-founder of the Maya Angelou School in Washington, D.C. And for the audience that cares about this, he is married to a Black woman. So you have this...
What? What was that? What was that? What? Hold on.
And for the audience that cares about this, he is married to a Black woman.
That's weird. So I know, I kind of know what she's referring to here is within the Black community specifically. the Black female feminist kind of community, there's a pretty hard um uh, well, for lack of a better word, there's a pretty bigoted and racist ideological position in there that is heavily critical of any black man, the successful black man who marries outside of his race, um, or a black woman who again marries or dates outside of their race. That's an incredibly problematic and really ugly part of that kind of perspective, and again, kind of throwing it out there haphazardly. The fact that you would even need to mention it makes me feel like there's probably you are aligned with this. I don't know. I don't want to put too much words in it, but it does make me feel like you are aligned in a positive orientation. Like, yeah, it's a good thing that this successful black man is married to a black woman, and it's important. Uh Yikes. I don't know. That's a definitive yikes for me. I think there's some talk. It's not very loud, but there is some talk about the extreme levels of acceptable racism and bigotry that happens within minority groups, and specifically I would say that one of the critiques that I've heard from black men, whether they were friends of mine, colleagues that I've had when this issue has been brushed upon, and again, readings that I've had from other individuals across the internet, essays and whatnot. There's a degree of pretty bitter and vicious kind of bigotry and racism of black women towards black men, specifically over this idea of like being a race traitor because you are marrying or dating outside of your it's it's a very ugly. I don't know if this particular person is positively orientated to that perspective or not, if they're making just kind of a joke of this. Honestly, I feel like this is a tasteless joke that you really shouldn't. I don't want to be prudish, but I feel like you shouldn't encourage this behavior by saying, "Hey, for those of you who are obsessed with this, yes, they're married." I feel like if you're going to do that, you need to make your joke very clear that the joke is on people who are obsessed over it, because it's unacceptable. That's an unacceptable perspective to have. And I know I'm a person who's now Austin being very morally puristic, puritanical here, but I do feel like this is one of those things that, from just a stylistic thing, if you disagree with this, you need to make sure it's fairly clear. Even if you want to joke about it, like even just a comment for those of you who are absolutely obsessed with for those of you who are absolutely obsessed with categorizing and making a list of and making sure all black men are doing the right thing and marrying black women. Yes, apparently he is married to a black woman. Congratulations. I guess you can add another one to your list. Like something like that, to where it is very clear that you are not in agreement with this. Because this doesn't go into literary criticism. This isn't anything. This is just straight up kind of a weird, obsessive and kind of semi-racist problem that I do feel like should not be encouraged.
So you have this family of characters inspired by this very real family bond, and it never comes up to mean anything. Like it.
Well, sure, yeah. She's not a great writer, but at the same time, the books are Harry Potter, and they're focused pretty exclusively on Harry Potter. And one thing I would say is that, again, when you're doing this kind of Harry Potter or this central character focused kind of story, central protagonist, and there's side protagonists, but you rarely ever have writing from their perspective. Not a lot of times. It's almost exclusive, if I remember correctly. It's almost exclusively Harry Potter centered, almost, I think 100% of the time, but like it's a lot. Yeah, that's what's going to happen. Harry Potter doesn't know this. He's only going to be touching upon things. That's kind of, in many ways, that can be done. Again, she's not a particularly good writer about this, but complaining that there's a lack of depth is the wrong complaint. Complaining that, it doesn't do a good job enticing on this may be a job, but lots of stories that I have found that are rather interesting, that do world building in an interesting manner, will often do this to where, again, the main character is introduced or touches upon something that they have no idea what it is, and they get a little bit of glimpse of it, but for the most part, they are left kind of in the dark because that's the nature of it. Like, you don't know their history, and you never will. You don't have the time. Harry Potter does not have the time to really investigate. And again, you're like, oh, well, he could spend more time on this, and she could have set up this long conversation where they discuss and analyze this. I suppose. But again, there is something to be said with touching upon it. And the mystery of you'll never know. You'll never know exactly how this relationship went out. Maybe you write it yourself, maybe you don't. Maybe you imagine it yourself, but you'll never 100% know how this relationship or how this dynamic functioned. That's ignoring plot holes or anything else like that, but that's just, yeah, like, at worst, she's just not a particularly amazing writer with this, and she's kind of lazy, but, like, I'm sorry, shitloads of authors are lazy when it comes to this.
And it never comes up to mean anything. Like, it's almost comical how little this allegory matters in the grand scheme of the book. I mean, we don't find out until book 5 that Sirius Black is related to Draco Malfoy. Tonks is killed by her aunt. Tonks is Draco's first cousin. Harry Potter's godson is Draco Malfoy's first cousin, twice removed. This is why there's dreary fan fiction, guys. And it just doesn't even make logical sense that we don't find this out until Order of the Phoenix, because you mean to tell me that in book 3, where Sirius is still considered evil and he's out there attempting to kill Harry, Harry's biggest op isn't out here like, shout out to my cousin. It is, like many of the racial and social commentary, very, very painfully superficial. But again, to an audience who would have read these books as kids and aren't necessarily like digging around in World War II history, like World War One.
Exactly. Like, again, you're laughing about it, but exactly, like, oh, you might say, oh, these are kids' books and they were never meant to be really dealt with. And again, as an adult, like, okay, yeah, they're consumerist popcorn. Like, okay, yeah, it's a Happy Meal. Oh, it's not nutritionally valuable and it doesn't have all these great vitamins and minerals. It's like, yeah, it's a fucking Happy Meal. I don't think she ever sold it as anything other than that. And again, yeah, you can complain that people talked it up a lot, and I certainly would. But I'm sorry, half of that was at least done by the goddamn fan base itself, obsessively talking about how amazing and fantastic this is, even as adults. Like, this isn't really on. Again, she made disposable Happy Meal crap, and everyone else wanted to make it into art and convince everybody it was art. And now that she's out of favor, now you're bitching and complaining that, it's not art. It's like, I don't think she did that. Like, on you.
World War II history, it's not something that comes up until you do a deeper analysis of the work. Rowling has been able to capitalize on being this crafter of youthful imagination, this possibility of adventure. Just like once upon a time, people very likely dreamed of finding a wardrobe that would take them to Narnia, people actively wanted their Hogwarts letter. The promise of escapism is sometimes more important to readers than anything else. And those nostalgia moments create a barrier among people who are able to grow up with this series and see it as something beyond that first layer, and those who just want to stay in Neverland.
Again, here's the problem. Yeah, that's a good point. I would agree with that. But the thing I would say is that neither position is wrong, or both positions are equally wrong. I would say on this one is that, again, the ones who want to tear it down now and critically analyze it again, you can do that, but a lot of them, I feel like they came about this from a very toxic perspective in that they want to tear it down now. They want to destroy it. The God has betrayed them, and now they want to recast it as the devil, and they really are just pissed off about this. And I don't know. I don't think that's healthy either.
On a personal level as well, because I've always had my own suspicions about this. Dumbledore being gay.
Rowling's relationship to the LGBTQ community before 2018 was overall positive, mostly. The two big statements she made that were of interest to the community was the reveal that Albus Dumbledore was gay, and that lycanthropy in the books was an allegory for HIV and AIDS. We'll start with that one. In the third book, Prisoner of Azkaban,
again, you're gonna hammer her because she's not a particularly good writer, or because it was very surfacely done, because you want these topics dealt with absolute sincerity and, more importantly, seriousness, and you want it to be done in the way that validates your perspective on these topics. My issue with that is that there's lots of ways to deal with the topic that might be of in depth and quality and blah blah blah, that don't value your particular solution and or conclusion regarding these topics and how they should be handled, or the way they should be depicted. My thing is that I feel like, yeah, it's pretty lazy or whatever. I feel like, again, she's just kind of thought of like, oh, the werewolf, that's such a tragic kind of figure, and in modern set, like, how would we in a modern setting kind of think of this? Like, it's kind of like this sad, like, is it as terrible and awful as it seems? And is it I could almost kind of see it like, again, she's dried from her experience. She's growing up in the 80s and whatever, or being an adult aware of situations in the 80s, and you have the AIDS epidemic, and like, oh, that's horrible and terrible. Oh, the AIDS thing. Yeah, we treated them, we were afraid of them, we weren't sure whether they infected enough, people had to hide it, all that stuff. Oh yeah, okay, sure, yeah. And it's this like biological thing. Again, is it lazy? Yeah. Is it fucking insensitive to some degree? But again, we could talk about the laziness and insensitivity to some degree, but I really just hope we're not just going to go on this long angry tangent of how morally depraved the author is for not doing this in the appropriate manner. It's the worst thing is, it's just lazy. It's just lazy capitalistic style consumerist writing. That's the greatest sin she has, J.K. Rowling, when it comes to writing style, is it's just kind of lazy.
and we are introduced to the character of Remus Lupin. And would you believe a secret werewolf with a name like that? Subtle. Then the world.
And everybody's name is fucking lame. Like, they literally have like Leviosa to levitate shit. Like, it is painfully fucking simplistic and stupid. Why are you talking shit about it? Who gives a shit?
Of Harry Potter, magical creatures are considered second-class citizens, and werewolves are stigmatized because of a fear that they will bite people and turn them into werewolves. Firstly, we have to discuss the trope of fantastical racism. This will be a larger discussion on here at a later time because it will allow me to talk about one of my favorite hyperfixation shows, Defiance, at long last. To sum it up,
Defiance is okay. I have issues with it, like meandering, but I watched it, some parts of it, and it's not bad. It's okay.
Fantastical racism uses mythological creatures and other imaginary groups to stand in for the oppression of real-life marginalized peoples, often as an allegory, or sometimes in tandem, like True Blood. And often it is poorly handled. So in terms of...
Again, poorly handled this implies that there is some kind of perfect handling or better handling of this. And again, we have to remember that the judgment for this, their criteria for judging this is purely ideologically based. There's it's not even like there's a large scale like subjective understanding, cultural understanding, blah blah blah, that might give us better analysis tools. Whenever they say something is poorly handled or handled brilliantly, I would suggest oftentimes this has nothing to do with the actual text or even its style, its writing, or cleverness, or anything like that. It's purely whether or not this aligned with a preconceived, developed understanding of the issue, and whether or not this comports 100% with your ideology of this. Not even necessarily that it doesn't comport to an ideology or a perfectly valid academic understanding of this thing, but it's a very personal response. So I'm not fond of this, so we almost might skip this section here, but it's we'll see.
HIV and lycanthropy. HIV is a virus that attacks the body's immune system that can be transferred through blood and certain bodily fluids: semen, preseminal fluid, precum, rectal fluids, and vaginal fluids. You can get it from sex, sharing needles, blood transfusions, etc. AIDS is the last stage of HIV infection that occurs when the body's immune system is badly damaged because of the virus, usually because there is no medication. On a purely surface level, I can understand how when monsters are allegories for a lot of real life ills in our world, or discrimination and mental illness, as messy as it is, I could get why this would be like a first draft idea, right? But then you go a little bit deeper and you start to ask, why did you make this character choice for this particular STI? Lupin was turned into a werewolf as a child by Fëanor Greyback. Greyback does this because Lupin's father makes a statement that werewolves are soulless, evil, and deserving nothing but death after Greyback attacks two muggle children, right? So in this allegory for HIV, we have two named werewolves of importance, right? One is a victim of discrimination and is like narratively forced into a heterosexual relationship in order to have a child and then die tragically for the narrative. J.K. Rowling said she wanted an orphan, so sorry, Remus, you have to be straight and reproduce and then die.
What? 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 Oh, wow. God damn. See, this is what I mean. Like, the casual, weird bigotry and an ugliness of this kind of analytical style is really off-putting, to where, oh, they had to make, we had to make you straight and you're forced to do this. What? Why? Well, I mean, clearly it should have been gay because of their friendship with, Harry Potter's dad and Sirius Black, or like, so even if, like, okay, I just decided, well, okay, I did want there to be some kind of orphan like thing near the end or whatever, so I wanted Remus to, do this and like, it just feels like this weird sour grapes. Like, I decided and identified that this particular individual had to be gay or lesbian. I think part of it is also Tonks. And because they didn't turn out like this, I'm now pissed off because I read into it. It just is ugly. I do not agree with this kind of perspective. I think this is incredibly harmful for not only literary criticism, it is also harmful for literary kind of engagement and enjoyment, because damn it if it doesn't just privilege the reader's own desire. In many ways, this is very consumerist minded, like customer is always right kind of perspective. This is why, again, we'll talk about this at a later date, but why I feel like a lot of the woke movement and LGBTQ movement like people are wondering, well, why was capitalism so easily, like, why are all these businesses, they do these half-ass kind of shit, but why are we able to see so much more of it? Because we have seen an explosion of this. Like, oh, is this because they're becoming better? It's like this. No, it's because just like back in the 70s, when they started selling, uh, uh doing ads that targeted like identity and individuality and aspects like that, rather than the ads kind of going after family orientated values and quality or all this stuff. They wanted to go after, and like cars and advertisement was more geared towards the validation of the individual uniqueness of people and statements of identity. Like, this is just that again, is, oh, well, if you ever wonder why is Paramount, or why are these places, the heavily or Coca-Cola or whatever, why are these extraordinarily capitalistic ideological institutions in many ways that have done heinous, terrible things and are absolutely dedicated to this? Why are they okay if it's not normal and it's not the normal idea? Why are they okay and oftentimes relatively, even if it's just on the surface level, um, okay with, again, LGBTQ themes, and why they're more accepting of this? Well, it's the same reason why now they're not, and why they're kind of pulling back on it. It's because they can sell it, and it can be sold very easily. Again, this ideological position is incredibly vulnerable to capitalism because it's entirely self-involved. It's entirely identity focused, and it's entirely about, I want to be fed and consume products that speak to me exclusively. I want to be validated. I want all of it nice and shiny. I want all this all the time. And that's really easy. Like, if they can produce the product to do that, they'll do it. And you'll be like, oh, yay, this is such a great change. It's like this, but it's not really. It might make your particular brand and flavor of stuff more popular, and thus more people will enjoy it. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. It's going to be a new coat of paint on the same old shit. Even if everybody, like, okay, let's just imagine the perfect thing. Everybody starts becoming LGBTQ. Like, it's literally the conservative nightmare. They're turning the frogs gay. Literally everybody in the United States, Western world, will say, becomes some form of lesbian, gay, trans, binary, transgender, whatever, LGBTQ, across the board, all of them, and that entire ideology becomes dominant, and everybody's happy. Rent is still going to be too high. You're still going to be a heavily consumerist identity, and it's still going to be the same shit. So this idea, this perspective is just, again, it's such an ugly thing. Again, really listen to what she says about this character and about the choices here. Let's imagine that this was an actual person, because if we want to put moral weight behind the perspectives and the depictions of LGBTQ community, then we can also put moral and ethical weight behind people's lives. So let's treat Remus as a human being, and his decisions were all his and his choices. This is a normal person who lived, married, whatever, had kid, all that stuff. What she says about that person.
And is like narratively forced into a heterosexual relationship in order to have a child and then die tragically for the narrative. J.K. Rowling said she wanted an orphan, so sorry, Remus, you have to be straight and reproduce and then die.
Like, you notice how if you frame it like that, if you actually put and hold being straight, being a father, being cisgender, if you think that these things have value just as much as any form other than that, LGBTQ of any form has intrinsic value and should be respected and cared for, Her comments sound really different, don't they? This is my problem with this entire perspective and this entire project, honestly. Not just her, but just kind of she is emblematic of this project, is that it tends to, at least in the shallower ends of the community, and the more Tumblr-esque, the more TikTok, YouTube kind of community, tends to be very ugly and prejudicial.
And then the other is an active child predator that wants to spread his condition to younger and younger people.
Uh that seems to be a bit of a breach there and an oversimplification of that. Like, I don't read within that storyline child predator. I read kind of more of a weirdly biblical, the son shall inherit the sins of the father. The father said something that I dislike and prejudicial, so I'm going to torment you by robbing or by making your child this way. I don't read child predator, even though, yes, he did go after a child. Again, the connotations of child predator are are not, I don't think, valid in that. I would have to again look back into this. Again, I'm not much of a Potter verse individual, but whether or not he again attacked those Muggle children, whether they were actually children or just young adults, and also what was the purpose of that? Was that to kill them or to turn them? Again, this could be again a product of I will change the next generation and force you to accept my kind by changing your children into this. Again, the idea of it being a child predator, I know she's going to draw this linkage of, oh, this is a common trope for gay men being somehow predatory and or pedophilic towards children. I think that is a projection knee-jerk reaction that I don't think most people and Rowling was thinking of. Again, I know you're going to be one of the things, well, there's too many problematic things. They all line up, so why would I give them the benefit of the doubt here? I feel like a lot of the problematic things have been recast to make all other problematic things seem in a certain light. So it's kind of this I'm recasting all of them so that they are this circular reason justifying the recasting of more, who then, because they have been recasted, justify the original recasting, so on and so forth. So again, you can maybe find some degree of problematic elements in this. This feels somewhat almost biblical kind of punishment. I shall punish the son for the father's sins, blah, blah, blah. But this is such a fairly common literary trope. This idea of the villain of somebody speaking ill of something and then that villainous behavior then attacking that individual, not directly but indirectly through their family. Like, it's it's weird. This would be like casting I don't know. It feels like a stretch, and I know that's probably where this is going to go, and I don't agree. Um,
You see how this is weird? The allegory
no,
only works
it's weird. Honestly, it's weird because of your framing. Not really.
if Lupin exists or if Greyback isn't a massive predatory cliche, but it's not. Plus, to have an HIV metaphor with a heterosexual man and a child predator representing a condition that at large impacts the queer community and marginalized.
Again, the child predator thing I don't agree with. And again, this whole essentialism, like, oh, you can't have somebody who is cisgender and straight have this allegory of something that is gay. They have to be gay. It's such an essentialist argument that I disagree. Anti-human to me. It is antithetical to any kind of understanding that can be developed the between groups, and I disagree wholeheartedly.
people just feels very like inelegant and cheap. It's also important for my American audience to understand that HIV and AIDS was much worse here than it was in the UK and other parts of Europe. Back in 2014, Michael Hobbs, friend of the show, wrote about this for the New Republic. Almost immediately after those first tests, Western European countries installed needle exchange programs, gave out free syringes, and established opiate substitution treatment. Germany even got needle vending machines. By 1997, England and Wales were giving.
I'm not sure the point on this, especially seeing how you're talking about socio-political and cultural kind of traditions here, um, in that a lot of this was just talking about the culture of this. This doesn't really say that, oh, they were treated better or worse as a function of the culture. This is more because they have universal health care, and that's just kind of standard to be universal health care. So I'm not sure why we're going on this tangent, but okay.
Out 25 million free syringes per day, anything to keep the virus from spreading, even if it meant making it a little easier to be a heroin addict that day. The United States, on the other hand, refused to provide federal funds for needle exchanges or even fund research into whether they were effective. Exchanges were established in some cities. By 1990, New York City was distributing 250,000 syringes a year, but they never achieved the coverage of the countrywide programs in Western Europe. I'm not trying to imply that the UK was some magical place for gay people or people with HIV and AIDS, but we can just see in terms of like the social reality that the UK and Scotland did a lot of work to try and protect people.
Again, I would say again, it's weird that you're kind of saying this. Let's go on for a second.
Versus the United States. Werewolves have often been a.
Okay, so she doesn't. I just wanted to make sure she doesn't elaborate more. This is a again, were they protecting the LGBTQ community, or were they protecting themselves from the LGBTQ community? And the mechanism which they had from an institutional standpoint, it just was easier and more convenient to do it through their universal health care and that kind of approach right there. Like you can praise universal health care and that it allows even bigots to do the right thing because it's helpful by just instilling in them a general social and cultural tradition of just doing universalized healthcare for healthcare problems, societal, healthcare threats and shit like that. But like I don't understand that. I don't understand the digression here. This doesn't change anything.
Metaphor for mental illnesses. I think, however, when you go to making it an allegory for a real condition that largely impacts queer people and marginalized people, it's a very messy comparison. It puts queerness in.
Is it? It's only messy because you make it messy. It's only messy because you only want to see or perceive these things as in these particular contexts. And again, that's kind of antithetical to, again, in many ways, allegory, like a metaphor. Like the whole point is taking it out of context. And again, you might say, well, it's too shallow for anybody to have any real thoughts about HIV or anything like this. Yeah, okay, but that's a stylistic shallow problem of her not being a particularly good writer. It has nothing to do with any kind of moral condemnation of trying to use these things. Should people who suck at writing not engage in complicated topics because they suck at writing? But then, well, what should they engage with? That would then be the next thing, is that if they don't engage with any complications, or they don't even try to do this, even though they suck at doing it, if they don't try, your perspective almost certainly would then condemn them for not trying, for not doing this, for not including these elements. So either she's damned if she do, damned if she doesn't, because she's not a good enough writer to do this in the way you want it to be done. And that maybe also has nothing to do with the quality of the writer. It might have more to do with the political and social and cultural perspective of that writer. Because I'll be honest, I've read more than a few authors who are praised by, whether it's feminist kind of critics or critical theory or critics or critical race theory or any of these kind of more woke ideological, I hate the word woke, I really do hate using it because it's been ruined and misaligned and destroyed by right-leaning dipshits. But I'm going to use it here just as a catch-all. The kind of left-leaning ideological perspectives. I've read more than a few authors who are held to a standard and, oh, this person's so amazing. And I'll be honest, I found like some of them are good and some of them are like genuinely like I feel like this is like it's not like dog shit, but it's not very good. And again, the appeal of it isn't actually the stylistic aspects. It is purely the ideology and the perspective that it shows. That's it. Again, that's not necessarily terrible or bad, but again, if you suck as a writer, I guess don't talk about any difficult topics. Otherwise, it'll be messy and you'll get shit on for life and eventually be called some kind of bigot or transphobe or something.
The narrative, but without queer people. Then we go to gay Dumbledore. Man, I am old enough to remember the thriving McGonagall X Dumbledore fan base.
Yeah. I wasn't part of the fan base at all. I never have been, but it was large enough and annoying enough that I did hear there was a decent number who were shipping that. And honestly, we could talk about, I always find it somewhat ironic that maybe she has, and if so, maybe we could look at that view. But I find that the shipping community within fan communities, one is extensively LGBTQ, very heavily LGBTQ coded, the shipping community, and very feminine for the most part. If it's not LGBTQ explicitly, it is very much dominated by women, and it's incredibly fucking toxic. I know she's just mentioned this in passing, but that's a fun little topic to go into. That is an incredibly toxic area. But
don't let them tell you it wasn't there. I remember it. People thought they were gonna fuck. It was October 2007.
I don't know if they thought they were gonna fuck. I think from my limited experience with the fandom and hearing this just precariously through other classmates at the time who were big on this and shit like that. The big thing was that they did, like, they weren't a couple anymore, but that they absolutely did do it back in their youth, and they were still not quite a couple, but kind of more than friends. They're just kind of old, so and old people don't fuck anymore, that kind of young person prejudicial and a closed-minded idea. But that was my impression. Again, not saying that she was wrong, but just a small little addition to that is not that they were going to, it's just that they did. Absolutely did back in the past. They had a fling.
At Carnegie Hall, Rowling was asked by a fan if Dumbledore had ever found love. She went on to explain that he fell in love with the dark wizard Grindelwald and then turned away from him when Grindelwald got deeper into dark magic. Dumbledore fell in love with Grindelwald, and that added to his horror when Grindelwald showed himself to be what he was. Canon event, honestly. When your partner gets into dark magic without telling you, it just fucks up all your crystals. Now, this was in 2007, and she had just announced that the mentor, the great paternal figure of the books, was a gay man. This was huge. But just like now...
Yeah, I do remember there was a lot of backlash to this, and a lot of communities online or whatever were accusing her of being like, this was pre-woke, and the word being woke, but or kind of pre. I think there might have been some mentions of it, but very much that she just made this change to appeal to the LGBTQ community, and she's just trying to do this to be a good little liberal leftist and throw them a bone. I do remember that being the big discussion point across the board. And in more right-leaning, dumbass spaces.
People were asking why this wasn't in the books explicitly.
when you say people, again, the LGBTQ community were asking this explicitly, or most of them. Some of them were asking why isn't this explicitly, and my opinion on this is that I am trying to find or figure out in all my experiences with, having gay friends and working with gay people, I'm trying to figure out what was there is there like any tell? Is there anything that is just like, oh, they just randomly start talking about, their gay sex? Like, and I don't remember this ever happening. So this whole idea that, oh, it needed to be more explicit is just like part of, maybe I'm just too old school in the sense of that whole you know, gay people are fine because they're just like us, and whatever differences there are, they're not really that important in the grand moral scheme of things. That whole kind of general argument of the old school LGBTQ community, um, way back in the day for acceptance and whatever, uh, like that seemed to match onto my experience because I've had a few gay friends here and there, and I've worked with a few gay individuals, and big thing that I would note is that there's nothing up. They're just people, and unless it specifically came up, like again, you could go weeks, days, months, never know that this person is actually gay or not gay, straight, anything, because we're at work. And again, that should be also something that should be considered partly is that, all right, well, when was Harry Potter in a school um where Dumbledore is the headmaster and the teacher? When was Harry Potter supposed to know that and experience and engage with Dumbledore in a way that would expose or show and illustrate Dumbledore's sexuality? Like, you start thinking about it from that perspective. Again, if you remember, you are, this book is written from a young, relatively young child's perspective. When is this kid gonna notice that Dumbledore is gay? And in what scenario are you gonna do that? Because that also going to lead to more weird stuff. Like, because otherwise, like again, it's either it's going to be mentioned in passing, like Dumbledore in a newspaper clipping, like, oh, well, we want it more explicitly in there. Well, if it's going to be explicitly in the book, Harry Potter has to be present for this. So what are you going to do? There are a few ways you can kind of do this in a way that is tasteful, but there are numerous ways in which, again, this very same crowd would then get uncomfortable with the fact that you're including a child in an adult man's sexual life or expression or existence. The then question would become, some from more prudish centers, but also I think quite frankly that this does rely on a trope of, again, gay men preying on or otherwise trying to influence, groom young men, and especially young boys. You could easily fall into the trope if you're not careful of all of a sudden, like, doing that. Because, like, okay, why is Dumbledore mentioning or talking about or otherwise expressing sexualized feelings and or sentiments in front of Harry Potter? And you could do this quickly in passing, like, somebody comes in or he's telling a story of, he fell in love with Grindelwald and blah, 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 and just kind of moves on. Like, how explicit and how specific do you want this to be? Because this, again, one, is a children's book. Two, Harry Potter is a child. And three, beyond that, Dumbledore is also like a professor. He is a teacher. He's in a position of power and of responsibility over Harry Potter. And for the most part, you really shouldn't be talking about your sex life to your students. Even in college, like, it's just not really an appropriate thing to do from a power dynamic thing. So I feel like this is a short-sighted criticism to where you want something that can't really fucking happen or it's very narrow. This is a very narrow gap. For the most part, most people's sexuality or even sexual orientation is not really explored to any degree, heterosexual or otherwise, in the books, other than it's the kids with themselves in the budding kind of romance, you know, high school romance bullshit. Everyone else's is fairly neutered and fairly conservative, and you might critique that, but again, in the context, it's understandable why you're going to be hesitant to push that.
There is nothing in the text that alludes to Dumbledore being gay or even gay-ish. Now, did I think Dumbledore was gay when I was reading the book? Yes, but for homophobic reasons. Anyone can have a twinkle in their eye and enjoy feminine hats. So it was actually problematic of me. And people have tried to make excuses for this by saying that, like, Harry is a kid, we're seeing it through Harry's POV.
Yes, that's not an excuse. That's a perfectly valid reason. I'm not excusing or not excusing anything. I'm just explaining a fairly understandable reason.
Therefore, we would not know if Dumbledore was gay. And all I can say is that, as heterosexual as these fucking books are, you cannot convince me that that is an actual argument. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not.
As heterosexual, like, again, they're not particularly sexual of any degree. And you might say, oh well, there's heterosexual sexual romanticism to some degree. Sure, I could see that. So that might be what you might want to mean when you say that is hetero-romantic rather than heterosexual. But just to differentiate that, because there isn't really a lot of sex implied or explicit in the books because they're kids' books, but there is romanticism in there. So romantic would be maybe a better descriptor. But there's two things I would say is one, the vast majority of people are heterosexual. So from a demographic standpoint, and again from her standpoint of the author, J.K. Rowling, that's what she knows and what she's going to be engaging with. Want to read more romantic or homoerotic or homosexual kind of narratives? Read from gay authors. They're probably going to write more of it. Okay, whatever. Next. The next thing is, okay, well, it needs to be as much as they're in there. You couldn't have slipped any of this in there. Again, aside from, like, I don't remember any adult relationships in there that are explicitly talked about and shown, too much so that weren't married relationships or otherwise. Like, it's not really done a lot in there. Like, because it's all focused on Harry Potter and the kids. So any sexuality or heterosexuality you have in there is very much done from a young person's perspective and in the young person world. So I feel like this misses the point.
I'm gonna sit here and like be reminded of the explanation about love potion and everything that happens in the Half-Blood Prince that we all had to be subjected to for you to tell me homosexual longing was out of the scope.
It was for multiple reasons. And again, oh, it's not in there. Like, it just, this is a purity testing that just kind of annoys me. And honestly, this is why, again, more than a few authors have talked about this, that they really are uncomfortable or they're kind of terrified. And now there's this new industry, the not new industry, but massively growth of this industry of, again, having to do sensitivity consultants and whatnot, because everyone's terrified of writing anything outside of what they are allowed to write about, because they know they're going to get torn to shit and harassed to a monstrous level by, again, these fanatic communities that are obsessed with purity testing everything. And if it's not perfect in the exact way they want, they just tear you to shit. And again, this isn't a defense of J.K. Rowling. Her writing sucks, and she kind of sucks a little bit. But it's just overwrought. That's the problem. And honestly, no, I don't think anybody really wants to touch on this because, like, it's not that you can't write about things that aren't outside you. That's the thing. It's just anytime you do, it's like rolling the dice. There's a 5% chance that if you get unlucky and this gets popular and picked up by somebody, guess what? You're now going to be, it's not just the normal curse of popularity and hyper focus because you're popular, is that these people are going to campaign for you being morally and ethically evil if they spot something, and they probably will.
Okay.
And to me, it was not a big deal. This is a very old man who has a very terrible job to do, and his gayness is not really.
On top of it.
It's not really relevant. Very relevant to him as a character, because I always saw him as a very lonely character.
But Rowling really stood behind this decision and wrote this tweet in 2015.
Again, that's a perfectly also valid thing. Is why isn't there? It's like, okay, the absence of it you could see as like a failing of the author, but if you don't immediately attack the author, again, the absence of him, again, this is a loneliness thing. This is, again, it's also a heartbreak thing. Maybe there is a good reason to think about this, why there isn't any explicit homosexual kind of coding or explicit kind of moments from Dumbledore, is because his heart is broken, and it still is. He never got over Grindelwald, and he's lonely. And again, he's not going to be expressing it because the person he would express that kind of sentiment feeling with and have those feelings that would be expressible is gone. That is perfectly fine. Again, you could critique her for being a bad writer and not explicitly doing that more effectively, but again, it just doesn't feel right to me to go that direction with this critique.
When someone said they couldn't see Dumbledore as gay, and she responded, maybe because gay people just look like people. Gay Dumbledore was the beginning of Rowling dropping these diversity nuggets into the narrative. I'm
sorry, part of the reason she's also doing this is because you guys are demanding it. The fan base is absolutely demanding it or pressing on this and just, again, projecting it on there. And for the most part, she seemed okay with it. Like, okay, yeah, sure, go for it, I guess, yeah. If we were to see this as disingenuous on her part, then the disingenuity comes from as a reaction to, again, the fanatical want of and kind of imposition of the fans.
Jewish characters in Harry Potter. Of course, you've never seen them. We've never mentioned a single Jewish holiday, even though we mention Christmas all the time. But
again, it ends up just it's never enough. It's never, ever, ever enough. Nothing is ever enough. And it just, why would you ever want to write when you know anything, when you know that this perspective is out there just waiting to harass the shit out of you for the sin of just not writing about every goddamn thing under the sun? And then to counteract that, like, again, I'm sorry, when I live in America. I'm not completely culturally ignorant of all different cultures around me, but I'll be honest, when I'm going around from store to store everywhere around here, 99.9% of the shit that I see is Christmas stuff during that time. I don't see a lot of Jewish holiday signage or anything anywhere. So especially as a kid who is not Jewish, again, it's like, oh, well, I need a Jewish kid in there. Then you're going to complain that that they just threw it in there. It's like, I'm sorry, she doesn't care. I'm sorry that she doesn't care about depicting Jewish holidays. That's not her experience. That's not what she wants to focus on. That's not what she wants to write about. I'm sorry that that's there. But otherwise, again, she's just going to end up having, well, I have to write about this, and then I have to write about it extensively, because I can't just throw a little bit of something in there, because then I'll be accused of just tokenizing and just throwing it in there and not caring. So I now have to dedicate, a couple of chapters to discussing and analyzing how Judaism exists within the wizarding world. For some people, that might be interesting, but again, it's just, all right, now I have to do that for what, Kwanzaa? I got to do that. How about Buddhism? Well, shit, we got to do Buddhist. Well, how about Taoism? Sure. Shintoism, shit, we got to do that in there. How about the different sects of Christianity? Okay, we'll do that. Again, she doesn't actually talk a lot about Christianity. I mean, there's not a lot of religious anything in there. And okay, different ethnicities. Okay, so we're just going to do it to ethnicities. All right, let's do it across the board. The whole point is, yeah, it's extremely simplistic, but then just doesn't seem to like understand anything about this, and the demands just again always seem so radically disconnected from reality.
There is absolutely a Goldstein somewhere in this castle. I illustrate these points to say that the discussion around Rowling's politics and the book's flaws was always around, but it was always overlooked by the larger fan base that just wanted to enjoy things. And
wasn't overlooked by the larger fan base. It was overlooked because ultimately these things were nitpicks of the highest order. And look, I'm sorry, like, I love doing critical analysis, and I'm perfectly fine analyzing shit from this perspective, but I'm also understanding that this is not particularly interesting to the majority of people, and probably shouldn't be. And I don't know if it's going to be a super benefit to them if they even do this a lot. Sometimes it is, but I don't need so much extreme external validation from everybody around me in groups to care about things that I care. I just don't need this.
Turn their brains off, as they are wont to motherfucking do.
Yeah, and you laugh about it because we all love this, but it's also wrong. This is the joke that's being here, is that it's funny, we're all want to do, but also the joke's on them because, they want to do this because they're just dumb, ignorant. Like, I'm sorry. They're not turning their brain off. Nobody ever turns their brain off. What they're doing is they're activating different parts of the brain and different things. And that's perfectly valid. I'm sorry. You got a little wonderful little LGBT kind of love scene back there. I know there's plenty of fan fiction and fiction out there of LGBTQ kind of perspective that is purely there just for the enjoyment of whether it's gay love or lesbian love or transgender or anything like that. And it's like you turn your brain off and just have fun and enjoy this very queer stuff, this very queer story. Don't think too difficultly about it. Don't think too hard about any of this, about the science fiction, fantasy, and magic systems. Who gives a shit? It's just fun, and we get to have fun while being gay. That's fine. I've read a couple. They're okay. Some of them are not my jam. Some are. But, it's all right. That's fine. I also like the in-depth stuff. That's fine, too. This weird, again, just how dare they not care about the shit I care about? Just get over yourself.
In addition to not thinking it was that deep, they saw the pretty basic neoliberalism symbolism of magical fascist Nazis as enough of a radical progressive point that even though the series' world building is very incomplete around that it meant that she was obviously a progressive person. And now she compares trans activism.
Again, that's on you. Again, the fact that, that's certainly on them. That's a good criticism, but I would say this is also still a criticism of the LGBT community and across the board, is that, again, this was projected on her. This isn't really her fault that everybody had these expectations for her to be X, and she wasn't X, she was Y. Like, I'm sorry, that's... Oh well. And whatever.
To Death Eaters. So really, we should always call into question her lazy character writing. And I will just say this, justice for Cho Chang, justice for Dean Thomas, justice for Kingsley Shacklebolt, because even in fanfiction, you guys make him into being such a fascist. And I'm just like, there's not enough of his character on the page to even give a whiff of that. But you guys will, you know,
Why? Again, there's such a weird essentialism. I wonder if they're aware of just how weirdly essentialist and reductively essentialist their readings are of things. It's odd. It's odd.
Make black characters act really weird if you give them attention. Now, while being critical of Rowling's writing, I think most people just assumed it was typical white woman writing in the 90s. Her politics in general were okay. In general, she did vote and campaign against Scottish independence during 2014, but she was also anti-Brexit and anti-Trump. Everything changed in 2019. Actually, 2018. She liked a tweet. She liked a tweet which referred to trans women as men in dresses, but had her representative tell people that it was a middle-aged moment. People's fingers slip. Not everyone realizes that you can see people's likes. People optimistically, hopefully saw it as a one-off. It was not. Now we go to 2019 and we enter Maya Forstater. Forstater was a tax expert and also the daughter of the producer of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, who did not have her contract renewed by the...
Huh. I didn't know that. I knew a little bit about, like, I kind of somewhat know that figure and know the discussion she's talking about. I didn't know the Monty Python linkage. Good research. Good little fun factoid. Again, I'm not sure why you're bringing it up, but it's, I guess, fun to know.
think tank Center for Global Development. She'd done work for them, but due to her vile opinions about trans women that she shared online, they did not renew her contract, and so she sued them. She said that she was an absolutist about her views and argued that, quote, framing the question of transgender inclusion as an argument that male people should be allowed into women's spaces discounts women's rights to privacy and is fundamentally illiberal. It's like forcing Jewish people to eat pork. She believed that her opinions were protected under the Equality Act of 2010. So, the Equality Act of 2010 brought together several pieces of anti-discrimination legislation to simplify things. Originally in 2019, the judge in this case wrote a 29-page judgment that was published, finding for starter views were incompatible with human dignity and fundamental rights of others, and therefore not afforded protection under the Equality Act. Forstater said that the judgment removes women's rights and the right to freedom of belief and speech.
So yeah, my memory of this case is foggy, so we'll just have to go with her and her information on this. It sounds relatively correct. I would say, in inevitably this does get a bit tricky because again we want to protect human rights, but we also want to protect freedom of speech, and we then tend to want to, as part of protecting freedom of speech, you have to some degree protect certain ideological positions because they will be expressed through speech acts. So I for the most part would find I'm trying to remember when I actually knew more about this particular case, what my stance was. I believe I sided more on the side that was against this particular instance of the lawsuit. Like, I agreed with some of the sentiments and the ideas there, and I felt that there was a bit of an overreach to some extent with this protection and this kind of like some speech is not protected. I tend to be very much not in favor of hate speech laws as kind of a principle. I find that they are not useful and they're counterproductive at best, and overall they're just not particularly conducive to a free speech liberal kind of perspective. It's interesting seeing the total doses right there. Even in this, this is COVID, right? We're doing the second doses, UK total second doses. I believe this is the COVID count. God damn, COVID was crazy fucking time. Hence why they're also doing an interview outdoors, like separated by like 6 feet, 7 feet. COVID. COVID is such a weird time. Anyway, so I don't necessarily disagree. Sorry, I don't disagree with Princess Weeks here. To any extensive degree here, I do think that this was somewhat frivolous, especially because it was a contract non-renewal, not necessarily a firing, which is, well, we can get into that a little bit to where I that might be just more of a labor issue rather than a free speech issue. I want to approach that as more of a labor problem rather than a free speech problem, but let's continue.
So she lost her initial case, but not before raising more than £85,000 through crowdfunding and getting the public support of J.K. Rowling, who said that she stood with Maya. This is also what made her share the horrific tweet. Dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who'll have you, live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real?
So, again, I would caution against calling this a horrific tweet. Because it's just not a horrific tweet. Again, Warren Smith plays on this a bit too fast and too loose and ignores the context of the situation. But
let me just say, as a Black woman, this is so clearly a loaded microaggression and coached in this "I'm not a bigot" tone that just breeds frustration.
Again, I can kind of this would be part where I am somewhat in agreement with, but I do feel like the fact that this is what set it off feels a bit strange. Again, her comment is, I think the worst is that it's generally insensitive and tone deaf to the overall conversation, and there is a degree here to where, again, she's hearing about somebody whose contract is not renewed because they believe in sex as being not being a contract, but sex as it being a reality and shit like that. That's what she's hearing. So she's responding going, hey, this person was fired wrongly. They're just saying that sex is real. Live your best life. Like, again, this was a bit of a mountain out of a molehill. I could see the problems with it, and I'm not going to go 100% against Weeks on this. But I do feel like we are rewriting history and trying to explain the somewhat irrational, explosive hatred that came about in response to this tweet. Again, J.K. Rowling has said stuff that after this point that probably is more appropriate to despise to this degree, but I don't. Again, it was a bit just too much for me.
But force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real? Let me just say, as a Black woman, this is so...
I'm not sure what as a Black woman has to do with this.
So clearly a loaded microaggression and coached in this.
I hate microaggressions. I hate the concept of it, and I do not agree with it to any sense or form. Beyond the most, again, at best, it is a painfully basic but also stupid kind of statement where, like, yes, microaggressions kind of exist, but that's not really, I'm sorry, it's just not that important, or it's not very critically revelatory to examine them, but I digress.
I'm not a bigot – tone that just breeds frustration. And
I'm not a bigot breeds frustration. Why? Because you want to believe everyone is a bigot around you. Again, that might be an unfair statement for me, but again, this ends up being this kind of weird standpoint theory to where you are Kafka trapped into, if somebody dislikes something and if you want to defend yourself against this accusation that you believe is unfair or unjust, that defense is evidence of the initial claim, and I fundamentally do not agree with that.
She would go on to say that she loves and supports trans people, but is just trying to protect women. She would then write an entire essay explaining her feelings about this, and I would say for more information and more in depth, you can watch any of ContraPoint's videos to get a deeper look at this. I am purely doing this from the cis perspective. If you could come inside my head and understand what I feel when I read about a trans woman dying at the hands of a violent man, you'd find solidarity and kinship. I have a visceral sense of terror in which those trans women will have spent their last seconds on earth, because I too have known moments of blind fear when I realized that the only thing keeping me alive was the shaky self-restraint of my attacker. I believe the majority of trans-identified people not only pose zero threat to others, but are vulnerable for all the reasons I've outlined. Trans people need and deserve protection. Like women, they're most likely to be killed by sexual partners. Trans women who work in the sex industry, particularly trans women of color, are at particular risk. Like every other domestic abuse and sexual assault.
I would say that I believe that both within J.K. Rowling, but even kind of what Judith Butler says, I do believe there's kind of an inherent, somewhat unexamined and allowed misandry, kind of a general fear and hatred of men and masculinity to a certain degree. There's a small thread there, but we won't pick that thread too much, but just it should be something to be aware of, that part of the reason why J.K. Rowling is transphobic to this extent is because J.K. Rowling has some pretty severe problems with men, and has probably some unexamined misandry there, hence why she doesn't like transgender women, because transgender women are biologically male and that triggers her. She's transphobic because at her core she has a problem with it. And honestly, that's a fair amount of, again, any of the what do they call them, trans exclusionary feminist activists or rights or TERFs, whatever they're called. Trans exclusionary radical feminists, that's it, TERFs. Is that TERFs are ultimately misanderistic. They hate men. They have a deep-seated fear and prejudice against men. And that's why they target transgender individuals, especially male to female transgender individuals, because of the male part. That's why it's always about women's safety and whatnot. And it's not about men's safety or anything else. It is purely that perspective. That's one of the things I wish would be brought up more, is that, again, reading Judith Butler here, again, why women should identify with transgenderism, because they suffer from the same kind of threat of force and abuse and whatever at the hands of men and blah, 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 like that.
Survivor I know, I feel nothing but empathy and solidarity with trans women who've been abused by men. On a surface level, that sounds all very reasonable.
Yeah, that's
very nice.
Sorry, that's not Judith Butler. That was Judith Butler quoting her. But notice again, that is inherently sexist against men. That is J.K. Rowling talking there. So
pathetic. She cares, right? But that's not her whole point. That's not why she's writing this, and that's not why she's defending the words of people like Maya. So I want trans women to be safe. At the same time, I don't want to make natal girls, which what the fuck is that even supposed to mean, and women less safe. When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman, and as I've said, gender confirmation certificates may now be granted without any need for surgery or hormones, then you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside. That is the simple truth. And you know what I think is kind of humorous about this is that she's married to a man. A lot of these gender critical transphobes have all this to say about the inherent evil of the penis and men and women spaces, yet they share their homes with them. Maya
Yeah, but again, that's fairly common across the board is hypocrisy. And again, I wouldn't say trans activists are free from this to any degree. And again, just to remind you that she did make a somewhat racist comment about a black man being married to a black woman, and how that is nice and appropriate. And all those sisters out there who are concerned with this, or people who are out there who are concerned with it, yes, he's married to a black woman, and that seemed to be some of both of a joke, but also a joke where there's some degree of agreement with that sentiment. So let's not be throwing too many fucking stones here. But yeah, again, that doesn't defeat the purpose. Again, this is a general othering of others, and again, because their mate, their male partner is not the other anymore, or they've been verified and made safe.
appealed her case, and 2 years later it went in her favor, and she was given a payout of £91,500 and interest of £14,904.31. From 2020 forward, Rowling continued to triple and quadruple down on her gender-critical ideology, penning award-winning essays and riling up an already transphobic area, the UK.
Again, riling up again. This is one of those things where I don't necessarily disagree, but I'm not particularly fond of the framework as this blame on J.K. Rowling for riling it up. Again, it takes two to tango on this one. She's writing essays because you keep going at her. And the more she writes, the more attention that this gets, because again, people are staring at the fight between two people or two things, J.K. Rowling and trans activists. Again, J.K. Rowling just writing one thing and then being done, everybody forgets about it. But because you keep fighting on this one and it's not going anywhere and devolving, to abdicate any kind of personal responsibility, not necessarily from Weeks. I'm not sure if she did any of this, but or responded to Rowling at all at the time, who knows, but just abdicating responsibility of the other party on this, in this instance, is a bit disingenuous or incomplete.
Turf Island with her words. She's aligned herself with anti-feminist, anti-gay, and racist groups, all in order to push this agenda, and it has been her life's purpose for years.
Again, most of those groups all share one common thing, is that they're not particularly fond of men, I would say. From what I remember of most of this, again, I paid some close attention to it at the time, but I've forgotten a good chunk of it. My general memory and my assessment of it was that this is exclusively her misandry.
Points has made 2 documentary-length videos about this. Jessie Earl was explicitly harassed by this woman. Trans women have already been explaining this over and over and over again. What Rowling has done is...
So part of the reason why she keeps saying that trans people have explained this over and over again is, the thing I have a problem with is that that's supposed to be proof in itself. That, again, this goes back to the standpoint kind of theory to some degree of, again, this is truth because, and what the explanatory power is given privilege because it's coming from a particular standpoint. in this case, an identity-based standpoint of, again, trans people.
Happen to the pre-existing transphobia and homophobia within society and soften it with this common sense language that has nothing to do with common sense, but has to do with social conditioning and colonial mindsets. I repeat, nothing has to do with common sense. She is attacked.
Again, I would certainly agree. There's a degree of anti-intellectualism within the TERF movement, and the appeal to common sense, especially among the more right-leaning aspects of this movement within America. Definitely, this is not particularly good, and continues to be this. Again, this inspires stuff like Jordan Peterson, Warren Smith, Peter Boghossian, the Weinsteins, specifically Brett Weinstein, I believe. You name it, like Steven Crowder, Alex Jones, all these pundits, Ben Shapiro, they all feed off of this kind of idea of common sense that's not actually particularly common. Colonialism, again, I don't, there might be some colonialist aspect there. I don't know why you're throwing in that phrase there, but again, this is a standard critical race theory, colonialist, kind of post-colonialist analysis perspective. So like a vegan, they always have to throw some shit in there about it.
Non-white cis women for not appearing like women. Colonial motherfucking white supremacy mindset. Transphobes are not new. The differences between sex and gender are not new if you know anything about how people talk about gender studies. The spectrum of these things, again, is not new. You knowing about it, you in a general way, and impacting your daily life is new, and only because we are actively being fed propaganda from people who don't read, don't critically think, and are willing to allow their weird insecurities and hangups to turn them into gender cops.
I would agree 100% mostly with this. Again, the post-colonialist kind of white colonialist comments were a bit off the mark, or just kind of, again, the problem is that this is coming from itself a politically ideologically bent individual, somebody who is very deeply invested into a particular ideological position, a political and ideological position that is, again, ideology isn't necessarily bad or good, but it becomes especially bad when it becomes like a dogmatic ideological position that is taken as not just a perspective, but as like an absolute truth statement and a anti-investigative statement. Like there's no self-reflection here. There doesn't need to be any more, because I found the one true word of God. It becomes religious kind of statements. It lacks any kind of critical engagement anymore, because there is no self-reflection on this. This is just preaching to the choir more and more and more. So I would say that the two to tango on this problem here is that on one side you have extremely ideologically bent and blinded by their own particular religious kind of fervent and zealotry in the forms of like Jordan Peterson, a good number of TERFs, people like, again, Warren Smith, Peter Boghossian, all these anti-intellectuals. These are the ones that are coming to mind because these are the ones that I've somewhat engaged with or seen a fair bit here and there, and other people like Ben Shapiro, blah blah blah. Those kind of figures. Tucker Carlson, we could probably see. We'll throw him in there. Lots of these right-leaning individuals, certainly. On the other end of that horseshoe are people more like, I'm sad, probably Weeks, who are just as kind of intellectually bent and anti-intellectual, in the sense that just because you read a lot of theory and you read a lot of scripture does not mean that you're intellectual. You are still very much anti-intellectual, because you are anti kind of looking at oppositional theory and being open to oppositional theory and theories that run counter to the one that you have currently selected as being the absolute righteous thing. You don't want to investigate them. You don't want to treat them with fair and balanced manner. You are an ideologue. You are somebody who is purely propagandistic at this point, and again, near religious. So you are not, by its definition, no matter how much critical theory you're going to read, you're only going to read and engage with and only going to think in one line. The stuff that agrees with what I already believe with. And I'm just going to build on more and more and more and more and more bullshit on that one particular belief structure. And it's not going to ever be challenged or effectively countered. I'm just going to read more stuff that confirms with my preconceived notion of reality. So it is anti-intellectual. So again, this is a bit of pot calling the kettle black moment. This is a bit of that, again, two Spider-Mans pointing at each other, a stupid meme where the one Spider-Man pointing at the other one. Again, this is that moment right there, for me at least, and I'm not claiming to be a centrist. Fuck that. Centrism is stupid. But this is kind of what it is. We'll continue.
Rather than talk to people about their actual experience. And it is especially...
And again, just because I talk to other people with experience does not mean that what they say is truth. It's from a particular form of epistemological truth, and it's a particular form of belief, and I can take some aspects of that and understand it, but that doesn't mean that that what they're saying or feeling can be applied outside of their own particular moment themselves. It is perfectly valid within the individual, but outside of that, it may not be very productive to center that experience.
Heinous in the United Kingdom.
Author J.K. Rowling made it international news, but it's caused hurt and distress.
As an American, we have plenty of issues of transphobia in this country, and it is getting worse and worse, especially for trans people of color. But there's just something...
Again, I'm going to go and say that there's a strong likelihood that because of her particular political background and, again, probably heavily invested in critical race theory, which I think has some merit, but I also think has some serious problems, we'll say. I think she's probably kind of racist. I think she's heavily biased and racist and prejudiced against white people and in favor of black experiences, because here's where I'm going to go with this. Anytime you say something like that, like it's especially bad for transgender women of color and black women, this is a really silly trope that just doesn't actually pan out particularly well in the data. From my experience, from looking at the data, it doesn't actually pan out that well. Sorry, it doesn't. Maybe we could look at it eventually, but again, it's this hyperfixation on me and my particularities and projecting those things as being the most important, significant, and impactful aspects of the world and of reality. And I just don't agree. I don't agree with that kind of perspectives, and I do find it is problematic to the point of being somewhat racist. And at the very least, prejudicial.
In the colonial waters over there that has made the cis women of the United Kingdom tap into their inner plantation mistress and really define their femininity through the subjugation of others. So it's a classic throwback. When they eat the heart-shaped herb and commune with their ancestors, they're just yelling at them about how England doesn't look the same anymore. The culture of the Anglo-Saxon is dying. Chicken tikka masala is actually a real Indian dish. One of the major sources for this section of the video is Sean Faye's The Transgender Issue, Trans Justice is Justice for All. It was a slightly dense but excellent read and full of citations. Highly recommend. It'll be part of the long ass list of sources. It was especially impactful to have a clear understanding of how hostile the UK media is and has been to trans people. I think as Americans, we don't really see this as much because the tabloid culture there is so extreme. Royal watchers might be more aware of this because of the relationship between the tabloids and the royal family, especially its women, and most recently its relationship to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, or Meghan Sussex, whatever you want to call yourself, girl. In this, Faye shares the story of Lucy Meadows, a teacher in the UK who transitioned and told her school. The school made an announcement about her transition, including her name change, in a school newsletter that quickly made the rounds into a local paper, and then the Daily Mail. Within 3 months of her...
All right, so yeah, no, like, if you start bringing up the tabloid culture, that I think that is somewhat of an interesting topic to talk about when it comes to British cultures. I do think it actually is a bit more intensive over there. I think we, rather than having the tabloid kind of aspect, we have, I think it's more podcast at this point for us, which is somewhat tabloid like, but again, kind of like the Joe Rogan, Alex Jones kind of aspects. But you know, we have our Daily Mail, we have our Fox News.
Harassment, dead naming, calls to leave her job, Lucy Meadows took her own life in 2013. Columnist Richard Littlejohn led those attacks in national headlines titled, and I apologize for using these pronouns, "He's not only in the wrong body, he's in the wrong job." The implication and fear-mongering that this would be confusing for children, that it's hinted at something inherently perverse.
Yeah, she's on target with this. I have no disagreements. This is a very common tactic with right-leaning attacks, is it does kind of apply to this weird common sense, but also this weird essential there's some corruption of the youth angle. There's this, it's a violation of natural law. It's a violation of basic common sense stuff. That's why it's going to be confusing. And this is especially heightened, this kind of attack style, when it comes to anything regarding children and teaching and education, and in many ways positions of any authority in society. So no disagreement there.
Stonewall, the UK charity, published in 2017 that 45% of trans young people had attempted suicide at least once. Faye says, Meadows had not been a public figure or a celebrity, nor had she ever sought to be. She had wrestled privately with gender for many years, and her decision to transition was, by all accounts, not taken lightly. All she had done was be trans, and to be honest about who she was, continuing with a job she had been good at in a school that supported her.
Yeah, I don't disagree with this. I would say there's one thing you could maybe problematize with this, or one direction you could take with some degree of problematic. Not when I say problematic, I don't mean morally. Remember, I rarely speak in that kind of tone, but more in a like an ideology, like an intellectual problematizing of things. Is one could make some kind of argument or discussion about the nature of being trans and the request of the pronouns, the request of society's kind of acknowledgement of this, takes the personal and turns it into a social kind of act, a socialization thing that does demand of, again, society a response to this. Thus, it is not necessarily I was just minding my own business and then I was attacked. It's more like you made a request to society and thus made it into a social, potentially social spectacle. It had to be a social act. I could see from an purely academic, intellectual, philosophical pursuit some ideas that, you know, you could develop this kind of argument to some degree, but from a practical, real world kind of thing, these kind of requests of society, especially something like this, are so common, ordinary, and generally non-newsworthy, they're fine. It's basically the equivalent of getting married and going from Miss to Mrs. or, something like that. Or again, getting a degree and now you are called professor or doctor. These requests are fairly commonplace of society, and any resistance to them, whatever resistance you might say is an acceptable form of resistance, should only be the most banal of, like, you say it, but like, okay, doctor, and then like in private or whatever with your douchebag friends, you go like, well, he's not really a doctor, is he? He's just, who's, whatever. He's just so arrogant calling himself doctor. But then like an actual social, the general social and cultural kind of response to this should be, okay, whatever. This shouldn't be causing waves. This kind of request is like tossing pebbles in a pond. Like, yeah, there's a couple of ripples, but those ripples are nothing. People want to treat it like you're throwing a meteor into a small pond, and this massive world-changing ending shit is dumb and bigoted and hateful, and it leads to responses and harassment that is awful and leads to, again, oftentimes serious consequences.
As much as the gender critical people pretend it's not, this is the result they want. What other...
I would take a small quibble here, is that I don't think this is the response that they want, or this is the result that they want. I think they want the response, but they don't want the result of the death. Now, I think that this is ultimately a non-issue to argue this point, because I'm going to take kind of a Noam Chomsky approach when it comes to this, is that when you're looking at the effects of this kind of thing, the intent might not matter that much, especially from an institutional kind of thing. Like Chomsky, I recently read this because I revisited Chomsky's weird email argument between him and Sam Harris, which is hilarious because Sam Harris kind of gets bodied pretty hard in there, and he comes off as a petulant child. Part of the reason why I'm not particularly fond of Sam Harris. I think he's kind of a douchebag. But Chomsky talks about the Clinton bombing of the Al-Shifa. I think it's Al-Shifa, right? I think it's Al-Shifa, this chemical production site. And it's one of the few ones that was in that region that could produce any medication for several million people who needed those medications and various medications. One of the few chemical and drug producing sites, and Clinton bombed it, mostly based on some fairly easy guesswork in retaliation to an attack that happened at a U.S. embassy. Clinton orders the bombing of this site, and it gets bombed, and like tens of thousands and thousands of people suffer terribly, die from this. Die as a result of this over their coming months and weeks and I suppose years. And many people have suggested that this is in many ways, maybe not genocidal, but this is a war crime and this is a pretty serious thing. Sam Harris was like, oh, well, it wasn't his intent to do this. Maybe he genuinely thought that this was a chemical weapons producing facility that they said it was. And Noam Chomsky kind of rightly points out, it's like, it kind of doesn't matter. One, those excuses are kind of dog shit. And two, they knew almost exclusively what was going to happen, because they're not dumb. They knew that they were bombing this chemical facility that produced drugs for this region that would cause incalculable amounts of suffering. The intent argument kind of is moot, or not functional. Again, it's a bit more in depth than that for Chomsky, but ultimately it's not particularly a useful metric to examine, because we can never know what the intent was. All we can know ultimately is the rationale, how well that rationale comports itself to the consequences. So that would be my way of saying I kind of agree and disagree at the same time with her condemnation of the TERFs here. Is the TERF kind of thing is that their intent on this may actually be not proportional to the harm that is caused by their things, but they're not stupid, and they aren't ignorant enough to suggest that they wouldn't know what the consequences of lots of their actions and their kind of intentions are, or their actions are. So the intention kind of becomes moot.
Reaction can be expected by telling people that they are perverse penis havers. Yet as shameless as this was, Faye explains that within a few years, trans activists were seen as the real bullies. A worthy movement to help a minority group has become a form of McCarthyism in bad wigs and fishnets, thanks to a bunch of bullies, trolls, and humorless misogynists. Feel too daunted to venture an opinion on anything transgender? Great. That's exactly how the bullies like it.
So again, this is a very dishonest framing from this, not from Weeks, but from this person here, that has, like, everything when it comes to, like, Ben Shapiro or Peterson or any of these pseudo intellectuals who are responding and kind of responding extremely harshly against any kind of progressive, more left leaning, woke kind of cultural movement. There's maybe a couple grains of truth to this, as I just said, that, like I said before, that again, the response from people like Weeks does create a very chilling effect on anybody wanting to talk about any of these issues in a way that does not 100% comport to the ideologically pure stance that has been established. That is absolutely true. But these people talk about this, again, it's pot and kettle for them as well. They are as ideologically purist and fucking resistance to any kind of disagreement as the people they're arguing against. So basically, it's just assholes arguing with assholes is the most common way I could phrase this. So again, dishonest on their part, but I would say that the grain of truth that they have doesn't actually support their perspective. It just kind of gives more context of, oh yeah, it's basically two extremists arguing with each other, arguing with themselves. Great.
I love how those with the most power call those who stand up for themselves bullies.
Again, I wouldn't say they have the most power. That would be, I wouldn't put that in. Because power is relative to the situation and the context. So I would not, again, this is part of her problem, or part of this ideological problem, is that again, there are power dynamics that are essentialized and firmly planted and presupposed within certain critical race theory or critical theory, feminist theories, that are intractable, unexaminable, and so dogmatic that it borders on religion, that prejudice one against something, to where, like, oh, these people are the people in power, we're not, we're weak, and we're always the underdog underclass. Even when we're winning, we're always the underdog underclass. I don't like this, because this is the same kind of framework that fuels the Trump and the MAGA people, is that no matter how much they're in power, the government is always after us. That's why we need Trump and his people to help save us. Like, well, they are the government. And what, right-leaning and conservative values haven't had power? Are you out of your fucking mind? Up until now, like, they've had power for decades and decades. In fact, we would say that they've had more power than a lot of liberal institutions, and certainly more than leftists, dear God, within America. So this is the reason I don't like this kind of perspective, is that even if it is correct, because the process is itself kind of self-justifying and circular, it's wrong and should be kind of cast out. This kind of perspective and language, because it ends up not working, for me at least.
Pretend they have some deep insight that they want to have, or that they want to ask really, pertinent questions about things. But really what they want to do is grill people about their genitals. They want to interrogate people on their sex change operations, their sex lives, their romantic lives, questions about shaving, not about how to make their lives easier. Just these freak show curiosity corners where people who are already dealing with massive harassment and
Again, people are dealing with massive harassment. I agree, but it also feels like there's a bit of histrionics and hyperbole here. But I don't disagree with this point. Again, that is part of the same thing with the conservative, and over here with anything leftist is they don't want to examine reality or deal with it. They just kind of want to find the small little things that from out of context sound crazy and strange, and then just examine them, poke at them, and then run away from actually dealing with any of the in-depth ideological or kind of the philosophical aspects of that perspective. They just want to look at the weird things, take it out of context, and clip it for likes. I don't disagree, but a little bit of hyperbole, but that's all right.
Discrimination are forced to justify and explain their existence in the face of reductive and hyperbolic talking points. To quote from Who's Afraid of Gender by the Judith Butler, imagine if you were Jewish and someone tells you that you are not. Imagine if you are a lesbian and someone laughs in your face and says you are confused since you are really heterosexual. Imagine if you are black and someone tells you you are white, or that you are not racialized in this ostensibly post-racial world. Or imagine you are Palestinian and someone tells you that Palestinians do not exist, which people do. Who are these people who think that they have the right to tell you who you are and what you are not, and dismiss your own definition of who you are, who tell you that self-determination is not a right that you...
I'm not sure I 100% agree with Judith Butler's perspective on this thing, but that's a broad conversation here. And that just leads to a general disagreement with some of Judith Butler's overall philosophical kind of perspective, just in general, not necessarily relating to transgender issues at all, just kind of a more deep problem I have with that this kind of heavy emphasis on the individual identity as like a weird truth claim.
You are allowed to exercise, who would subject you to medical and psychiatric review or mandatory surgical intervention before they are willing to recognize you in the name and sex you have given yourself, the ones to which you have arrived. Their definition is a form of effacement, and their right to define you is apparently more important than any right you have to determine who you are, how you live, what language comes closest to representing who you are. Whether it be trans kids in sports or trans children getting gender-affirming care, they never want the opinions of trans people. They want to lecture at trans people, call them into question, and then mock them when they get angry. They will bring allies out to talk to them, but they will be cis people attempting to have an intellectual dialogue while ignoring that we're talking about the lives of real...
Again, I don't like this pretend we're talking about the lives of real people. I don't like that because it is anti-intellectual. It genuinely is. And that might be fine with them because, like, again, they're propagandists, they're political pundits. They're not intellectuals, they're not academics, they don't want to deal with these things. But it's just like, well, it's kind of ironic that you use academic investigation when it is useful for you, but then turn around and decide, no, we don't want academic investigation here. I just want power, and I want to win. And again, this hang up on the cisgender thing, like the fact that we don't listen to trans voices, like there's plenty that is happening where transgender people are speaking and their voices are being heard. I kind of disagree with this to a certain extent, but again, that's a broad conversation.
People, and that we can ask questions, you just can't be a fucking asshole about it. Just like
Again, that's a pointless thing. You can ask questions, you just can't be a fucking asshole about it. That does translate to you can't disagree. And that is genuinely what it is. And if you do disagree, you can't have any externalization of that disagreement, meaning you can't actualize it in the real world. You can disagree with me just so long as you have zero power to disagree, for that disagreement to have any effect in any way, shape, or form.
Do with black people and other marginalized groups. They tell you who you are, they tell you your lived reality isn't real, and they tell you that if you're offended, it's because you are the wrong person. Colonial mindset. I'm going to say that a lot this.
Yeah, and I'm going to disagree with you a lot on that mindset. So, yeah, we're going to hit an impasse on that one.
Video in this part of the section. And I'm not just saying that to make some piffy comparison for the sake of.
Yeah, you are. I'm not going to give you the no. I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt on that one. Sorry, no.
Of it, even the trans women in sports argument fills me with rage. As I explained in a previous video about challengers, which I know y'all didn't watch, but that's okay. Black cis women in sports have historically been accused of being men. Althea Gibson, a tennis player, was forced to take a testosterone test. In the 1960s, black athletes were forced to segregate because they represented a literal threat to white supremacy.
Remember when they used to say I look too mannish? Black girl mad.
Kind of. I feel like we're glancing over some complications there. I wouldn't disagree with this too harshly, though.
This is why there is a constant obsession in sports of having a great white hope, which we are now seeing play out with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese in the W.
No, I don't. I think however true that statement is, I think it is true for such a small minority of individuals that I think this comes back to a degree of the racism that she has, the extremely deep-seated racial bigotry and bias that this individual has. Because for some people, yeah, some conversation, absolutely. Some people are going to glom onto that, but those people are racist, and they're racist before, they'll be racist again. I don't think racists deciding to try to reframe something as a racial issue is inherently makes that issue racial or racist. Again, there's a degree of vindictive essentialism that I've noticed in this particular individual, in this perspective. Again, I don't think it's a horror, like morally condemning a horrible blah, blah, blah. And for the most part, she seems to have done a decent amount of good research, and I don't disagree. And, but I question some of these aspects, certainly. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and end it there for now. We'll pick this up next time and probably try to finish it. I'm trying to get through these quicker, but I do a lot of chatting and talking, so my apologies. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Thank you for hanging out, and until next time, and as always, I hope you have a good one.